The air in the gilded cage was thick enough to bottle and sell as expensive poison. It was a heady cocktail of stale cigar smoke, cloying perfume, and the quiet desperation of 1,000 suckers, all hoping to beat a house that was built on their losses. I was propping up a section of the bar that had seen better decades, nursing a scotch that tasted like regret, when she glided into my line of sight. Her name was Mara. At least that's the name she used this week. She was the star hostess of the cage, a 5'9" package of trouble, wrapped in a dress that clung to her like a second skin. The color was midnight blue, and it shimmered under the low lights like a pool of deep, dangerous water. Her hair was the color of spun gold, but her eyes were the color of a steel-gray sky just before a storm. She moved through the tables with a practiced grace, a smile here, a whispered word there, a touch on the shoulder of some high roller who thought he was buying her time. He wasn't. He was buying something else entirely. I'd been watching her for 3 nights, not because I was paid to, but because she was the most interesting thing in a town built on cheap thrills. I knew her game. She didn't sell dances or companionship. She sold secrets. The gilded cage was the kind of place where men with fat wallets and thin morals came to whisper. Senators, mob bosses, CEOs with more skeletons in their closet than a medical school. Mara was the spider in the center of the web. She'd lean in, laugh at a bad joke, her earpiece, a tiny, flesh-colored thing almost invisible in her ear, would be recording. Later, she'd make a drop. A microdrive slipped into a pocket during a friendly hug, a cassette left in a handbag for a friend to pick up. Information was the real currency in Vegas, and Mara was the mint. Tonight, she was working on Senator Thurman, a big fish. A man with a jaw like a granite cliff and eyes that had never known a moment of doubt. He was laughing too loud, his hand resting a little too familiarly on the small of her back. Mara was playing him perfectly, leaning into his touch, her eyes wide with feigned admiration. I saw her fingers brush the tiny, almost invisible switch on her cocktail ring. The recorder was on. I watched her work for another hour, finishing my drink and ordering another. The bartender, a tired-looking guy named Sal with a face like a roadmap of bad choices, slid it over without a word. He knew when to keep his mouth shut. It was a survival skill in this town. Around midnight, Mara disengaged from the senator with a promising whisper and headed for the ladies' room. A minute later, a greasy-looking character in a suit that was 2 sizes too big for him got up from a nearby table and followed her. He was the middleman, the courier. The transaction would happen in the hallway, out of sight, business as usual. But when Mara came back, she was different. The practiced smile was gone, replaced by a tight, thin line. Her eyes, usually cool and calculating, had a flicker of something new in them. Fear. She scanned the room, not like a hostess looking for customers, but like a cornered animal looking for an escape route. Her gaze skipped over me, then snapped back. For a second, our eyes locked. In that look, she wasn't the predator anymore. She was the prey. She finished her shift with a brittle efficiency, avoiding the senator, who was now looking annoyed. When her time was up, she didn't head for the staff exit. She walked straight towards me. The scent of her perfume hit me first, something expensive and exotic like orchids and gunpowder. "You're Rick, right?" she said. Her voice was low, a smoky alto that could make a man promise her the world. "The private eye. That's what it says on the door," I said, turning on my stool to face her. "What can I do for you, doll? Lose a poodle? Find a cheating husband?" Her lips twitched, but it wasn't a smile. "I need to talk to you, privately." "Talk is cheap." "This talk isn't," she said, her eyes darting towards the entrance. 2 men in plain dark suits had just walked in. They didn't look like they were there for the floor show. They had the flat, empty eyes of government-issue muscle. And it's getting more expensive by the second. I downed the rest of my scotch. The burn was a familiar comfort. "My office is just down the street. Your office will be the first place they look," she said, her voice urgent. "We need to move. Now." She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my sleeve like talons. I could feel the tremor running through her. Whatever she'd recorded on Senator Thurman, it wasn't just his recipe for cornbread. It was the kind of secret that got people buried in the desert, and the clock on her was already ticking down. The neon of the strip bled through the windows of my beat-up Ford. painting Mara's face in shifting shades of red and blue. She hadn't said a word since we peeled away from the curb, leaving the gilded cage and its two grim-faced visitors in our rearview mirror. The silence in the car was a heavy thing, loaded with unspoken questions. I drove without a destination, just putting miles between us and the trouble, heading for the anonymous sprawl of the city's underbelly. Finally, she spoke. "They were feds." "No kidding," I said. They had that look, like they just stepped out of a brochure for righteous indignation. "They're not the only ones," she went on, ignoring my sarcasm. "Thurman's people will be looking too, the ones who do the wet work." "So you've got yourself a real party," I said, taking a corner a little too fast. The tires squealed in protest. "You want to tell me what's on that little recording of yours that has the whole world wanting to take you out for a permanent vacation?" She took a deep breath, the glamour of the gilded cage completely gone now, replaced by a raw-edged fear. "It wasn't just Thurman. He was meeting someone, a man named DeMarco." I whistled low. "Vinnie DeMarco, the union boss?" "The same," she said. "They weren't talking about endorsements. Thurman's planning to run for president. DeMarco controls the docks, the truckers, a lot of votes, but there's a problem. Another candidate, Governor Reeves." "Let me guess," I said, the pieces starting to click into place with a sickening familiarity. "Reeves is in DeMarco's pocket too." "Was," Mara corrected. "Reeves was getting too ambitious, making promises he couldn't keep, threatening to expose DeMarco if he didn't back him. So Thurman and DeMarco were discussing a solution." "A permanent one," I finished for her. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. This wasn't just a political scandal. This was a conspiracy to commit murder, involving a senator and one of the most powerful mobsters in the country. And she had it all on tape. "I have the whole thing," she whispered. "The plan, the method, the man they're hiring, a professional named the Cleaner. They're going to make it look like a boating accident, next weekend on Reeves' yacht." I pulled the car into the shadowed parking lot of a 24-hour diner, the kind of place that served coffee that could strip paint and eggs that had seen better days. I killed the engine. The sudden quiet was deafening. "You're a fool, you know that?" I said, turning to look at her. In the dim light, she looked younger, more vulnerable. The steel in her eyes was still there, but it was coated in a layer of ice. "You play with fire, you're going to get burned." "I didn't know," she shot back, her voice cracking. "I thought it was the usual garbage. Payoffs, bribes, a little blackmail. I sell that stuff, Rick. It's my living. I don't get involved. But this is different." "So why come to me?" I asked. "I'm a two-bit shamus who chases cheating husbands. You're in over your head with the big leagues." "Because you're not one of them," she said, her gaze intense. "You're not a cop, you're not a crook. You're just in between. And you're the only person I've seen in that club who wasn't trying to buy me or sell me something. You were just watching. You see things, don't you? The things people try to hide." "I see a dame who's got a tiger by the tail and is about to get eaten," I said. "What do you expect me to do? Walk into the FBI office and hand them the tape? We'd be dead before we got to the front door." "I don't know," she admitted, and the admission seemed to cost her. I panicked. You were there. You seemed like a man who knows how to handle trouble." "I know how to walk away from it," I said. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. The scent of orchids and gunpowder was still in the car. The look in her eyes had hooked me. Good and proper. I was already in. "Where's the recording now?" She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, metallic object, no bigger than a tube of lipstick. "The original is in a safe place. This is a copy, enough to prove what I have." As she held it out, a pair of headlights swept across the parking lot, cutting through the darkness. A big black sedan moving slowly. It didn't pull into a space, it just idled at the edge of the lot, a dark, predatory shape. The headlights died, but the engine kept running. They hadn't found us by accident. "Get down," I hissed, shoving Mara's head below the dashboard. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't just a warning anymore. The hunt was on, and we were the bait. The black sedan didn't move. It just sat there at the edge of the parking lot, a shark in the shallow water, waiting for a sign of blood. The engine's low, steady rumble was the only sound. "They know," Mara whispered, her voice muffled against the floor mats. "They followed us." No kidding, I grunted, my mind racing. My office was out. Her place was a death trap. We were sitting ducks in a 2-ton tin can with an engine that sounded like it had asthma. Stay down. I didn't wait for an answer. I twisted the key in the ignition. The old Ford protested with a shudder that ran through the whole chassis, then caught with a wheeze. I slammed it into drive, stomped on the gas, and the car lurched out of the parking space, spitting gravel. The headlights of the sedan flared to life, slicing through the darkness and pinning us in their high beams. I floored it, swinging the wheel hard. The Ford screamed around the corner of the diner, the back end fishtailing wildly. I fought the wheel, my knuckles screaming, and straightened us out just as we shot onto a side street. A glance in the rearview mirror showed the sedan powering after us. It wasn't flashy. It was just big, fast, and relentless. It ate up the pavement, gaining on us with terrifying ease. "Who are they?" Mara asked, pulling herself up onto the seat, her face pale in the passing glow of a streetlight. "The welcome wagon," I said. "Who do you think? Thurman's boys or DeMarco's? At this point, does it even matter?" I swerved again, taking a sharp left down a narrow alley lined with overflowing dumpsters. The Ford's chassis scraped against a metal bin, sending a shower of sparks into the night. The roar of the sedan behind us echoed off the brick walls, sounding closer than ever. This wasn't a chase. It was an execution. They were just toying with us. "They're hurting me," Mara said, a dawning horror in her voice. "They don't want to kill me here. They want to take me somewhere quiet." "Then let's not make it easy for them," I muttered. I saw the end of the alley coming up fast, opening onto a brightly lit, multi-lane boulevard. There was no time to stop. I just held my breath and hammered the accelerator. We burst out of the darkness into the glare of the strip, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic. A chorus of horns blared as cars swerved to avoid us. Tires screeched. I caught a glimpse of a tourist's face, a mask of pure shock before we were past. The sedan was right behind us, forcing a taxi up onto the curb. I needed to lose them, but my Ford was a lame horse in a race with thoroughbreds. Brains would have to do what brawn couldn't. I dodged and weaved through the river of headlights, a frantic game of chicken where I was the only one who didn't know the rules. I blew through a yellow light that turned red a second before we got there, glancing in the mirror to see the sedan get caught by a wall of cross traffic. It was a small victory, but I'd take it. I kept going, putting as much distance as I could between us before they found a way around. I drove for 10 minutes, taking random turns, doubling back, trying to create a pattern that wasn't a pattern. Finally, I turned into the parking lot of a place called the Sleepy Time Motel. The sign was a flickering neon cactus that had seen better decades. It was perfect. I killed the engine and the lights, and we sat in the sudden, suffocating darkness. The only sound was our breathing, ragged and loud in the small space. "We can't stay here," Mara said, her voice trembling. "No," I agreed, "but we can stay for an hour, and right now, an hour feels like a lifetime." I got us a room from a night clerk who didn't look up from his racing form, paying cash. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap lemon-scented cleaner. The carpet was a sticky swirl of brown and orange that made my eyes hurt. I pulled the heavy curtains shut, plunging us into a gloomy half-light. Mara sank onto the edge of one of the double beds, looking small and lost. The midnight blue dress was wrinkled, and the perfect facade of the gilded cage hostess was shattered, leaving just a scared woman. "Okay, doll," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "The fun and games are over. Start talking, and don't leave anything out. Who were you selling that recording to?" She looked up at me, her eyes wary. "A man named Kaito. He runs an information brokerage. He deals in corporate secrets, political dirt, nothing like this." "Nothing like a murder conspiracy," I finished for her. "So what was he going to do with it? Sell it to Governor Reeves?" "No," she said quickly. "Kaito's clients are discreet. They pay for leverage. He probably would have sat on it, used it to control Thurman or DeMarco down the line. He doesn't like messy business." "Well, the business just got as messy as it gets," I said. "How do you contact him?" "I don't," she said. "He contacts me through a dead drop, a locker at the bus station." "Great. So we can't even sell our way out of this mess." I started pacing the small room, my mind turning over the angles. They found us at the diner, Mara. They didn't just stumble across us. They weren't just cruising the back streets of Vegas hoping to get lucky. Her brow furrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying they knew where we were going, or they knew how to find us. I stopped pacing and looked at her. My gaze dropped from her face, down her dress, to her handbag lying on the bed beside her. Then to her shoes. Expensive, elegant heels. The kind a woman like her would never abandon. Take off your shoes, I said. What? She asked, bewildered. Your shoes. Take them off. A flicker of understanding or fear crossed her face. She slowly bent down and unbuckled the straps. She picked up the right shoe and held it out to me. I took it. It was lighter than it looked. I ran my thumb along the heel. It felt solid, too solid. I found a tiny, almost invisible seam. I dug my thumbnail into it. There was a faint click. A small section of the heel popped open. Inside, nestled in a hollowed-out space, was a tiny metallic cylinder, no bigger than my thumb. A transmitter, a homing beacon. I looked from the device to Mara's pale face. The glamour was gone. The menace was real, and it was riding along with us in the heel of her shoe. They're not hunting us, doll, I said, my voice cold and flat. They're hurting us, and they know exactly where we are. The little metal cylinder felt cold in my palm, a death sentence in a designer heel. I looked at Mara, and the last vestiges of the glamour girl hostess evaporated, leaving behind a terrified con artist who'd been conned herself. Did you know about this? I asked. My voice was quiet, which was a lot scarier than shouting. Her eyes widened, the fear in them genuine this time. No, Rick, I swear to God, I'd never. I'm not that stupid. Someone is, I said, tossing the shoe back onto the bed. And they're not just stupid, they're clever. They didn't just put a tail on you. They put a leash on you. Every move you've made tonight, they've been watching on a map. I walked to the window and peeked through a gap in the curtains. The parking lot was quiet, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the flickering cactus sign. But they were out there, somewhere, waiting for their signal to move in. So what do we do? She asked, her voice a small, fragile thing. They think we're still here, scared, waiting for the sun to come up. My mind was clicking, the gears turning fast, lubricated by pure adrenaline. We give them what they want. I picked up the shoe again. We're going for a little drive. But they'll follow us. Exactly, I said. A grim smile touched my lips. But we won't be in the car. The plan was dirty, simple, and had a 50-50 chance of getting us killed. Those were about the best odds I'd seen all night. We needed another car, a disposable one. I left Mara in the room, telling her to bolt the door and not open it for anyone but me. I slipped out the back into the humid Vegas night and cut through a couple of alleyways until I hit a bigger street. A block down, I found what I was looking for, a row of tourist rentals, parked outside a slightly better motel than ours. A convertible, top down, with keys glecking in the ignition. Some schmuck from Ohio probably, thinking Vegas was so friendly he could leave his car unlocked. I was in the driver's seat and the engine was turning over before I'd even closed the door. It purred like a contented cat. I drove it back to the sleepy time, parking it in the shadows at the far end of the lot, away from my Ford. Mara was waiting, her hand pressed to her mouth when I slipped back into the room. Time to go, I said. I took the tracker from the shoe and wedged it deep inside the convertible's front seat cushion, where it wouldn't fall out but wouldn't be easily found. Then I took the keys from my Ford and tossed them on the bed. We're leaving this behind. Why? Because they're expecting a beat-up Ford, not a cherry red convertible. It'll confuse them. Buy us a few extra minutes. I grabbed her hand. Her skin was cold. Come on. We ran, keeping to the darkest edges of the lot. I didn't look back. We piled into the convertible, and I drove out of the motel without lights, easing onto the street before flicking them on. I headed for the Strip, driving like a man with all the time in the world. Inside, my heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. Where are we going? Mara asked, clutching the dashboard. To the biggest, brightest, loudest place I can think of, I said. The Tropicana Royale. It's always a zoo. They'll have fun trying to find two people in a crowd that size. I drove the convertible right to the main entrance of the Tropicana Royale, where a line of hopefuls waited to get past the velvet rope. I pulled up to the valet stand, tossed the keys to a pimply-faced kid in a red jacket, and said, "Be careful with her, pal. She's a rental." Then I took Mara's arm and we melted into the crowd, disappearing into the casino's roaring neon-lit maw, just as the black sedan, our real pursuers I hoped, was getting a different kind of ping on their screen. Inside, the air was a hurricane of noise. The chime of slot machines, the rattle of dice, the murmur of 1,000 conversations all layered over a brassy jazz tune. It was perfect. It was chaos. I pulled Mara towards the bar, my eyes scanning the room, looking for threats in every face. We walk through here. Don't look back. We go out the other side, find a cab, and disappear. "What about the car?" she asked. "Let them have it," I said. "By the time they realize it's a dead end, we'll be long gone." We were halfway across the casino floor, pushing through a sea of gamblers and dreamers, when a man at a craps table caught my eye. He wasn't playing. He was just watching the crowd. He was well-dressed, with a face that was handsome in a cold, brutal way, and his eyes, when they swept over us, lingered for a fraction of a second too long. He wasn't one of Thurman's government-issue thugs. He wasn't one of DeMarco's street soldiers. This was something else. This was the professional. The man they called the cleaner. He hadn't followed the car. He'd known we'd come here. He was waiting for us. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to a security guard standing by the entrance to the High Roller Lounge. The guard started moving, cutting a path directly towards us. The trap wasn't outside. It was in here. And we had just walked right into it. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a couple of ham-fisted thugs looking to make a point. This was a surgeon with a scalpel, and we were on his table. The security guard was just the orderly, here to hold us down. "Don't look at him," I said out of the corner of my mouth, my eyes fixed on a slot machine that was busy eating a woman's pension. "Act natural. Head for the bar." "Bar? He's right there." "He's expecting us to run. That's what amateurs do. We're going to get a drink." I took her arm, my grip like iron, and steered her towards the gleaming mahogany bar. It was a stupid, arrogant move, but it was the only one I had. The cleaner was a pro. He'd anticipate panic. He wouldn't expect us to walk towards his man. The guard was closing the distance, 20 feet, 15. He had a walkie-talkie in his hand and a look on his face that said he was about to earn his bonus. "Rick," Mara's voice was a strained whisper. "Trust me," I said, though I had no idea why she should. We reached the bar. I slapped a $5 bill on the polished surface. 2 whiskeys. Fast. The bartender, a guy with a slicked back hair and a tired smile, started pouring. The guard was 10 feet away. I could feel his shadow falling over us. The cleaner hadn't moved, but his eyes were locked on us, a predator enjoying the final moments of the chase. This was it, the point of no return. My plan was ugly, but it was all I had. "Mara," I said, my voice low and calm, "when I tell you I want you to scream." "Scream?" Her eyes widened in disbelief. "A good one, like you've just seen a mouse. A big, ugly mouse with a gun." The guard was right behind us. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. He opened his mouth to speak. "Now," I said. Mara let out a shriek that could have shattered glass. It was a masterpiece of terror, high and piercing. At the same time, I pivoted on my heel, driving my elbow hard into the guard's solar plexus. He let out a woof of air like a punctured tire and doubled over. I grabbed the 2 whiskeys the bartender had just poured and threw one, glass and all, into the face of a burly guy playing blackjack next to us. He roared in surprise and pain, clutching at his eyes. The casino floor, which had been a low hum of activity, erupted. The burly man's friends stood up. The croupier shouted. People started pointing and yelling. In the middle of it all, I grabbed Mara's hand. "This way!" We didn't run for an exit. That's what they'd be watching. We ran deeper into the chaos, towards the high roller pits. The cleaner was momentarily obscured by the crowd we'd just created, but I knew he'd be moving, cutting us off, trying to anticipate our path. We dodged past a roulette table, where a woman in a fur coat was screaming at her husband. We skirted the edge of the pandemonium I'd started. I saw a door, a plain, unmarked wooden door with a small, wired glass window, a service entrance, staff only. Without breaking stride, I slammed my shoulder against it. The lock splintered and the door burst inward, spilling us into a different world. The roar of the casino was replaced by the clatter of dishes and the hiss of steam. We were in a long, narrow corridor, the casino's backstage. The air tasted of grease, bleach, and desperation. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly institutional glow on the stained linoleum floor. I pulled the door shut behind us. The heavy wood thudded into place, and the sound of the casino was muffled to a distant, angry roar. We were plunged into a relative silence, broken only by the hum of the lights and our own ragged breathing. We were out of the fishbowl, but we were now in the maze. And somewhere in that maze, I knew, was the cleaner. He wouldn't be far behind. "Where are we?" Mara whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the steel shelves stacked with cleaning supplies and racks of dirty linen. "The kitchen," I said, looking both ways down the endless corridor. "And unless you want to end up in a meat grinder, we need to keep moving." And the door swung shut behind us, cutting off the noise and the light, and leaving us alone in the dark. The darkness was absolute for a second, a thick, suffocating blanket. Then my eyes adjusted, picking out the dim emergency lighting running along the baseboard, casting long, distorted shadows. The air was thick with the smell of boiled cabbage and industrial disinfectant. "Move," I whispered, pulling Mara down the corridor. We were rats in a trap, and the exterminator was coming. We passed a set of swinging doors that led into the main kitchen. I risked a quick look. It was a scene of controlled chaos. Chefs in white aprons shouted orders, sweat beading on their brows as they worked over flaming grills. Pot and pans clanged like a blacksmith's forge. No one had noticed us, not yet. "They'll have every exit covered," Mara breathed, her voice tight with panic. "The loading docks, the employee parking." "Then we won't use an exit," I said, my mind racing. "We'll make our own." I pushed her towards a narrower hallway, this one lined with canvas laundry bags stacked high on wheeled carts. The floor was slick with spilled water. At the far end was a large stainless steel door. A sign above it read, "Disposal." "What's in there?" I asked. "The trash chutes," she said, a flicker of an idea in her eyes. "And the incinerator, for the heavy stuff." "Perfect," I said. "Nobody ever checks the trash." It was a disgusting, desperate plan, but desperate was the only currency we had left. I tried the handle on the steel door. It was locked. Of course it was. I looked around. A small metal box on the wall held a fire hose. Next to it was a red alarm handle. Pulling it would bring the fire department and every security guard in the building. Not an option. My eyes fell on a heavy-duty floor jack, the kind used to lift industrial cooking equipment. It was old and rusted, but it looked solid. "Help me with this," I grunted. We dragged the heavy jack over to the door. It scraped loudly on the concrete floor, the sound echoing down the hall like a gunshot. We both froze, listening. Nothing. Yet. I positioned the jack's flat head against the door, right next to the lock mechanism. I started pumping the handle. The hydraulics hissed. The jack groaned under the strain. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sharp, metallic crack, the lock housing buckled. The door frame splintered. The door was open. The room beyond was even hotter and smellier. A row of massive, greasy chutes ran down one wall, ending in a huge, rumbling compactor. The air was thick with the stench of rotting food and something chemical, something acrid. This was where the casino's glittering facade came to die. "There's a ladder," Mara said, pointing to a metal rung ladder welded to the wall next to one of the chutes. "It leads down to the sub-basement. The delivery trucks pick up the compacted blocks from there." It was our way out. A slimy, horrifying way out, but it was a way. "You first," I said. "Go. I'll be right behind you." She didn't argue. She grabbed the ladder, her expensive dress already smudged with grease, and started to climb down into the dark, stinking opening. I watched her disappear into the darkness, then turned back to the door we'd just broken. I grabbed the floor jack and wedged it firmly under the door handle. It wouldn't hold him for long. Not a man like the cleaner, but it might slow him down. It was the only insurance I could buy. I turned back to the chute. The darkness below seemed absolute. I took a deep breath of the foul air and put my foot on the first rung. That's when I heard the soft click from the doorway behind me. I didn't need to look. I could feel him, a presence that sucked all the air out of the room. I slowly turned my head. He was standing in the doorway, a silhouette against the dim light of the corridor. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a thin silver stiletto, maybe 6 inches long. It looked like a surgical instrument. He moved with an economy of motion that was terrifying. He stepped over the broken door frame, his eyes fixed on me. They were cold, dead eyes. the eyes of a man who did his job and went home. He glanced at the open chute, then back at me. A slight, almost pitying smile touched his lips. He knew I was trapped. He had me cornered. "Going somewhere?" he asked. His voice was soft, polite, and utterly devoid of emotion. The stiletto in his hand didn't waver. It was an extension of his will, a piece of cold, hard purpose. "Just taking in the sights," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "The decor is a little rustic for my taste." He took a step forward. His shoes made no sound on the grimy floor. "You've caused a lot of trouble tonight. My employer doesn't like trouble." "Tell him to take it up with customer service," I said, edging sideways, putting myself between him and the open chute. My mind was racing, looking for a way out that didn't involve getting a 6-inch steel letter opener between my ribs. The room was a dead end. The only way out was down. He smiled again, a thin, bloodless stretching of the lips. "There's no need for this to be difficult. The girl, the recording, give them to me. I'll make it quick. You have my word." "Your word?" I let out a short, harsh laugh. "Pal, your word isn't worth the spit it's written on. I've met snakes with more integrity." He shrugged, a minimal, economical gesture. "As you wish." He moved. He didn't rush. He flowed, a liquid shadow gliding across the floor. The stiletto came up, aimed for my gut. It was a professional's move, fast, clean, and fatal. I was faster. I didn't try to block it. I threw myself backwards, hitting the floor hard and rolling. The blade hissed through the air where my stomach had been a second before. I came up on one knee, my hand scrabbling for anything I could use. My fingers closed around the handle of a metal bucket. It was filled with some kind of congealed, foul-smelling grease. I didn't hesitate. I hurled it at him. He sidestepped the bucket easily, but the greasy contents sloshed out, splashing across the floor in front of him. It was a desperate, stupid move, but it did what I needed it to do. It made the ground treacherous. His eyes flickered to the slick patch, then back to me. A flicker of annoyance, the first real emotion I'd seen from him. He was going to have to be careful now. That bought me a second. That was all I needed. While his attention was divided, I kicked out, not at him, at the large, red-painted lever on the wall next to the compactor. The emergency activation lever. My foot connected with a solid clang. The lever slammed down. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, gut-wrenching groan, the compactor roared to life. The massive hydraulic ram at the far end of the room began to move, slowly at first, then with terrifying speed, grinding towards the opposite wall with the force of a landslide. The noise was deafening, a mechanical scream of crushing force. The cleaner's head snapped towards the machine, his professional calm finally broken by a moment of surprise. It was the only opening I was going to get. I didn't get up. I scrambled on my hands and knees like a cockroach and dove for the open mouth of the trash chute. The darkness swallowed me whole. I slid down the metal shaft, a chaotic, bumpy ride through filth and darkness. I could hear the compactor's roar above me, and then, just before I fell out the bottom, I heard another sound. A shout of pure, unadulterated rage. Whether it was from the cleaner being caught by the machine, or just from being outsmarted, I didn't know. I didn't care. I hit the bottom with a bone-jarring thud, landing in a mountain of soft, damp garbage. The air was even worse down here, a thick, suffocating miasma of decay. I was covered in slime, my suit was ruined, and my elbow was screaming in protest. A moment later, Mara was there, pulling me out of the pile, her face a pale oval in the gloom. "Rick, are you okay?" "I've been better," I grunted, shaking a banana peel off my shoulder. "But I'm alive. Let's go." We were in a huge, low-ceilinged sub-basement. A massive, cube-shaped block of compacted trash sat on a conveyor belt, ready to be loaded onto a truck. The air hummed with the sound of machinery from far away. "This way," Mara said, pointing towards a set of heavy steel doors. "The loading dock." We ran, slipping and sliding across the greasy floor. We burst through the doors and out into the cool night air. The loading dock was empty, bathed in the stark white light of a single flood lamp. A semi-truck was backed up to the dock, its engine idling. The driver was leaning against the cab, smoking a cigarette. He saw us, and his eyes went wide. He took one look at my ruined suit and Mara's disheveled state, and he knew we weren't part of the night crew. "Hey, you can't be out here!" he shouted. I ignored him. I ran to the passenger side of the cab, wrenched the door open, and shoved Mara inside. I followed. slamming the door behind me. "Drive," I said to the stunned driver. I didn't have a gun, but I had a look in my eyes that told him I wasn't in a negotiating mood. "Drive now, or you're going to be explaining a dead body to your boss." He looked from me to Mara, then back at the dark doorway we'd just come through. He didn't need any more convincing. He flicked his cigarette away, jumped into the driver's seat, and slammed the truck into gear. The big rig lurched forward, pulling away from the casino just as the alarm bells began to ring. We were out, but as we merged onto the dark, empty highway, leaving the glittering lights of Vegas behind us, I knew we weren't safe. We had the recording, we had a target on our backs, and somewhere, maybe back in that room, maybe not, was a very angry, very professional killer. The hunt wasn't over. It had just changed locations. The truck cab smelled of stale coffee, cheap air freshener, and the driver's fear. It was a smell I was getting used to. The big rig rumbled down the highway, eating up the miles of blacktop that stretched out into the Nevada desert like a scar. Vegas was a glittering smear in the rearview mirror, a bad dream we were trying to outrun. The driver, a beefy guy with a greasy ponytail and a name tag that read Earl, kept shooting nervous glances at me. He was gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles were white. "Look, mister," he said, his voice cracking. "I got a family. I don't want no trouble." "Neither do I, Earl," I said, my voice flat. "That's why we're having this friendly little drive. You just keep pointing this thing east and we'll all be friends." Mara was silent, staring out the window at the endless dark landscape. The grime from the trash chute was smudged on her cheek and her golden hair was tangled. She looked less like a femme fatale and more like a refugee from a war zone. But I knew better. The war was just getting started. We drove for another 20 minutes in silence until the lights of Vegas were gone and we were alone in the vast, empty darkness. I saw a sign for a dusty turnoff leading to some long-forgotten ghost town. "Pull over here, Earl," I said. He did, slowing the truck and easing it onto the gravel shoulder. The engine died, and the silence that rushed in was immense, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. "Okay," Earl said, his hands up in surrender. "Take the truck, take my wallet, just let me go. I won't say nothing to nobody." "I know you won't, Earl," I said, reaching into my jacket. I pulled out my wallet, not a gun. I took out all the cash I had, a little over $300, and tossed it onto the dashboard. "That's for your trouble and for your silence." He stared at the money, then at me, confused. "Here's the story you're going to tell," I said, leaning forward. "You had engine trouble. You pulled over. A couple of kids, maybe, or drifters, hitched a ride. They seemed okay. Then they got jumpy, took your truck, and left you here. You walked for miles to get help. You didn't get a good look at them. It was dark. You were scared. Got it?" He nodded, his eyes wide. "Good." I held out my hand. "Your phone." He reluctantly handed it over. I popped the battery out, pocketed both pieces, and then opened the glove compartment. I found his logbook. I tore out the last couple of pages. "Now get out," I said. "Start walking. Don't look back." He didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled out of the cab and started jogging down the road, not even looking back for his money. I slid over into the driver's seat. The truck was a beast, but it was anonymous, a ghost on the highway. "Where to now?" Mara asked, her voice quiet. "You tell me," I said, starting the engine. "You're the one with the secrets. You must have a bolt hole, a place no one knows about." She thought for a moment, her gaze distant. "There's a place, a motel in a town called Redemption Creek. It's a nothing spot off the main highway. I have a room there, paid for a year in advance, under a different name." "A different name?" I asked. "Let me guess. Lola? Christine? Veronica?" "Jane Smith," she said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. The most boring name I could think of. "Smart," I conceded. "How do we find it?" "Get us to Highway 95, she said. "I can direct you from there." I got the truck back on the highway. The anonymity of the big rig was comforting, a steel shell between us and the world. But it was a temporary fix. They'd be looking for the truck by now. "We need to hear it," I said. "Hear what?" "The recording, the original. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." She nodded slowly, then reached into her handbag. From a hidden compartment in the lining, she pulled out a small microcassette. It was the real thing. The key to the whole rotten kingdom. My truck didn't have a cassette player, but Earl's did. I fumbled around until I found it, a dusty old thing under the dashboard. I popped the tape in and hit play. The first voice was Senator Thurman's, smooth and pompous, full of self-importance. Reeves is becoming a liability. He's ambitious, and ambitious men make mistakes. The second voice was a gravelly growl. Vinnie DeMarco. Mistakes he can't afford to make, not with what I know about him. We need a permanent solution, Vinnie, Thurman said. An accident, something clean. The cleaner is the best, DeMarco rumbled. He'll make it look like a heart attack on his yacht. No fuss, no mess. They discussed the details, the date, the time, the method. It was all there, a cold-blooded conspiracy, laid out as casually as if they were planning a golf trip. My stomach turned. These were the men who ran the country. Then came the part that made the blood freeze in my veins. And our little canary? DeMarco asked. The hostess, Mara. Thurman chuckled, a dry, ugly sound. She's a greedy little thing, but she's predictable. Let her record it. She'll think she's hit the jackpot. She'll take it right to her buyer. And the buyer? He works for us, Thurman said. He'll take the recording and take care of the girl. We get the leverage, and we tie up a loose end at the same time. 2 birds, 1 stone. The tape went silent. I didn't look at Mara. I just stared out at the dark highway, the white lines disappearing under the truck's headlights like a dream unraveling. The whole thing was a setup, a frame job from the very beginning. She wasn't a hunter who'd recorded the wrong conversation. She was the prey they'd deliberately lured into the trap. The recording wasn't a prize she'd stumbled upon. It was bait. I finally turned to look at her. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with a horror that went deeper than fear. It was the look of someone who'd just realized the cage door had been locked all along. You knew, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You didn't just sell secrets. You were a specific part of this operation, their little canary. No, she whispered, shaking her head. I didn't. I swear, Rick. They used me. The man I worked for, Kaido, he must have been working for them all along. So you're just a victim, I said, the words dripping with sarcasm. A poor, innocent girl who got mixed up with bad men. I'm not innocent, she shot back, her voice cracking with desperation. I've never claimed to be. But I'm not a fool. I wouldn't walk into a trap like this, not knowingly. I didn't know what to believe. Was she telling the truth, or was this just another layer of the performance? The most convincing act yet? The fact that she was genuinely terrified didn't mean she wasn't also a manipulator. The two things often went hand in hand. I switched on the truck's radio, scanning for a news station. I found one. The voice of a news anchor, crisp and professional, cut through the static. Reports of a major incident at the Tropicana Royale casino tonight. Police are investigating a disturbance in the kitchen area and are seeking to question 2 persons of interest. They are also looking for a stolen garbage truck, last seen heading east out of the city. The casino's owner, Senator Thurman, has issued a statement condemning the brazen criminal act. I switched it off. The net was spreading. They weren't just looking for a man and a woman anymore. They were looking for a stolen garbage truck. We were a headline. I looked at Mara, huddled in the passenger seat. She was a beautiful, dangerous woman who had brought a world of trouble down on my head. She might be a victim, or she might be the architect of her own disaster. It didn't matter. We were in this together now. Redemption Creek, I said, my voice hard. Let's go see what kind of welcome Jane Smith gets. The truck ate the highway, its massive tires humming a monotonous song of escape. The sun was just beginning to think about rising over the eastern horizon, painting the undersides of the clouds a bruised purple. The desert was waking up, and it was just as hostile as it had been in the dark. Mara had finally fallen asleep, her head resting against the passenger side window. In the dim, gray light, she looked almost peaceful, almost innocent. But I knew better. Innocence was a currency she'd spent a long time ago. The tape had changed things. It had turned her from a clever, immoral player into a piece on a board she didn't even know she was on. The question was she a pawn, or was she the queen, playing a deeper game than I could see? I didn't trust her, not an inch, but I was stuck with her. She was the key and the lock and the door all at once. We had to ditch the truck. It was a giant, screaming signpost pointing right at us. I saw a turnout, a dusty track leading to a dried-up lake bed, a flat, white expanse of nothingness. I pulled the truck off the highway, the suspension groaning in protest. I killed the engine. The sudden silence woke Mara. What is it? What's wrong? We're here, I said. Time to say goodbye to Earl's ride. We got out. The air was cold and clean, a stark contrast to the stench of the casino basement. I wiped down the steering wheel, the door handles, anything I might have touched. Mara did the same. I left Earl's wallet and the torn-out logbook pages on the driver's seat, just like I'd planned. It was a thin story, but it was the only one we had. Now what? She asked, hugging herself against the chill. We're in the middle of nowhere. Now we walk, I said, pointing down a faint dirt track that paralleled the highway. Redemption Creek is about 5 miles that way. It'll be dawn by the time we get there. We started walking. The desert was vast and indifferent. The only sounds were our footsteps crunching on the gravel and the distant hum of the occasional early morning traffic on the highway. It was a walk of shame, a walk of defeat. We were two ghosts, banished from the neon paradise and left to wander the purgatory of the desert. You still think I set you up? Mara asked after a while, her voice small in the immense emptiness. I think you're a woman who survives by selling things that aren't yours, I said, not looking at her. And you got caught selling something a lot more dangerous than you thought. Whether you knew the buyer was working for them is the million-dollar question. I didn't, she said, her voice firm. Kaido was my fence. He was supposed to be neutral ground. If he's working for Thurman, then they've been playing me for a long time. Or you're playing me now, I said. It's a tough call. We walked the rest of the way in silence. As the sun finally crested the horizon, bathing the desert in a harsh, unforgiving light, we saw it. Redemption Creek. It wasn't a town. It was a place where hope had come to die. A single street with a handful of buildings. A gas station with a hand-painted sign warning of last gas for 100 miles. A diner that looked like it hadn't seen a customer since the Nixon administration. And a motel. The Last Stop Motel. The sign was a bullet-riddled piece of wood, the O and stop hanging by a single screw. Charming, I muttered. It's anonymous, Mara said. That's what matters. The motel office was a small, dusty cubicle. The clerk was an old man with a face like a crumpled road map and eyes that had seen it all and weren't impressed. He was reading a tattered paperback and didn't look up when we walked in, just jangled a small bell on the counter. We're closed, he grunted. I have a reservation, Mara said, her voice changing. It was softer now, less the smoky alto of the hostess and more the quiet tone of a tired traveler. Under the name Smith, Jane Smith. The clerk finally looked up, his eyes narrowing as he took in our disheveled state. My suit was a write-off, stained with garbage and grease. Mara looked like she'd gone 10 rounds with a garbage disposal. Paid in advance for a year, he said, his voice flat. He turned to a box of old-fashioned key cards and flipped through them. He pulled one out. Room 7, around the back. You damage anything, you pay for it. You cause any trouble, I call the sheriff, and he don't like trouble. He slid the key across the counter. I paid him for a second room, in cash from the emergency stash I kept in my shoe. He didn't ask for ID. In Redemption Creek, cash was the only ID that mattered. Room 7 was at the far end of the row, tucked away in a corner, offering a little more privacy than the others. It was a basic box, a bed, a chair, a small bathroom with a shower that probably hadn't been cleaned since the Nixon administration either. But it had 4 walls, a door that locked, and no windows on the ground floor. For now, it was Fort Knox. Mara slumped onto the bed, the exhaustion finally hitting her. I went to my room, next door, and took the fastest, coldest shower of my life, trying to wash the stench of the Tropicana Royale off my skin. I put on my spare set of clothes, a fresh shirt and pants that felt like a luxury. I went back to room 7. Mara hadn't moved. She was just staring at the wall. We need to get some rest, I said. Then we need to figure out our next move. We can't stay here forever. I know, she said softly. I stood there for a moment, watching her. The femme fatale, the girl who sold midnight, looked like a lost child. The shifting loyalties in this mess weren't just about the players in the game. They were about the ones I was feeling myself. Part of me wanted to leave her, take the tape, and vanish. Another part, a dumber, more stubborn part, felt a strange sense of responsibility. I walked over to the door, about to go back to my own room. I put my hand on the doorknob, then stopped. I sniffed the air. There was a faint scent in the room, Underneath the smell of stale cigarettes and cheap lemon cleaner, it was the smell of cigar smoke, not the cheap, acrid stuff Earl the truck driver had been smoking. This was expensive, rich, aromatic tobacco, the kind of smoke that belonged in a leather-lined clubroom or a Senate office. Someone had been in this room. Recently. My hand froze on the doorknob. The scent was faint, but it was there. A ghost in the room. It wasn't the cheap, acrid stench of a truck driver's short cigar. This was rich, dark, and expensive. The kind of smoke a man like Senator Thurman would blow in the face of the world. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning every corner of the dingy room. The bed, the chair, the curtains. Nothing looked out of place, but that was the point. A professional doesn't leave footprints. He just leaves a scent, a small, arrogant signature. What is it? Mara asked, sitting up straight, the exhaustion on her face replaced by a fresh wave of fear. Someone's been here, I said, my voice low. Recently. Her eyes darted around the room, her mind catching up. How do you know? I can smell him, I said. Cigar smoke, the good stuff. She went pale. That's impossible. No one knew about this place. No one. Someone knew, I said. The question is, are they still here? I moved fast. I didn't bother with the lamp or the phone. Too obvious. I went to the bed and ripped the cheap blanket and sheets off. I flipped the mattress. It was heavy, lumpy, and smelled of dust and despair. Nothing. I checked the frame, running my hands along the cold metal edges, and there it was. A small black disc, no bigger than a quarter, taped to the inside of the frame. It had a tiny pinprick of a light on it, so faint you'd have to know it was there to see it. A state-of-the-art listening device. They're listening, Mara whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Right now? They've been listening, I corrected, my voice grim. I didn't pull it off. Pulling it off would send a silent signal that it had been discovered. They know we're here. They know we know. This whole place is a trap. But how? She insisted, her voice rising with hysteria. How did they find us? That was the question that was chewing a hole in my gut. We'd ditched the tracker. We'd ditched the truck. We'd covered our tracks. There was only one way they could have found us this fast, this accurately. I looked at her, really looked at her, not as the scared dame in the motel room, but as the hostess from the gilded cage, the girl who sold secrets. You, I said, the word landing in the room like a block of ice. It has to be you. What? She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. No, I told you everything. Did you? I took a step towards her. Did you tell me about the emergency transmitter stitched into the lining of your handbag? The one that's activated by a specific radio frequency? A little panic button your boss, Cato, gave you just in case? Her face was a mask of disbelief, but her eyes flickered. Just for a second. It was all the confirmation I needed. It's not what you think, she stammered. It was for my protection, in case a deal went wrong. A deal like this one? I shot back. He wasn't protecting you, doll. He was tracking his merchandise. You weren't his partner, you were his package, and when you went off script, he activated the beacon. He didn't need to follow you. He just needed to flip a switch and listen for the ping. The whole rotten scheme clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. Kaito, the information broker, was Thurman's man. He'd been using Mara all along, feeding her targets, letting her think she was a player. The recording of the murder plot wasn't a mistake she'd made. It was the final job, the one where the canary was supposed to sing for the last time before being caged for good. So they know, I said, stating the obvious. They know we have the tape. They know we're in Redemption Creek, and they know we know they're listening. So what do we do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. We give them a show, I said, a grim plan forming in my mind. It was another stupid, arrogant plan, but I was fresh out of smart ones. We're going to walk out of here. We're going to get in my car. We don't have a car. We will, I said, and we're going to drive west, back towards Vegas. We'll talk loud enough for them to hear us. We'll make it sound like we're making a run for it, trying to sell the tape to the highest bidder. Why? Because they'll be expecting it. They'll be concentrating all their efforts on the road west of here, I explained, which means the road east is going to be very, very empty. It was a bluff, a double bluff, a house of cards built on a foundation of pure nerve, but it was all we had. I walked to the door, my hand on the knob again. We need a car. There's a gas station. The clerk's kid probably leaves the keys in a pickup. Let's go. I opened the door and stopped. A dusty, beat-up sheriff's car was parked right outside our room, blocking the exit. A man in a worn-out uniform was leaning against the fender, sipping coffee from a styrofoam cup. He wasn't big, but he had the settled, solid look of a man who'd been dealing with trouble in this town for 20 years and was bored by it. He looked up at us, his eyes hidden by a pair of cheap sunglasses. A slow, lazy smile spread across his face. "Mornin'," he said, his voice a gravelly drawl. "Heard you folks might be having some car trouble. Sheriff Brody, thought I'd come by and see if I could help." My first thought was that he was too small to be a real threat. He had a potbelly that strained the buttons of his uniform and a chin that had given up the fight years ago. But his eyes, even behind the cheap sunglasses, were like chips of flint. They were the eyes of a man who spent his days watching people lie, and he was very, very good at his job. "Car trouble?" I said, leaning against the doorframe, trying to look casual. "No, Sheriff. Just admiring the scenery. It's got character." Brody took a slow sip of his coffee. "Scenery gets old after a while," he drawled. "Especially when it's got two faces I've been seeing on the wire this morning. A man and a woman, wanted for questioning back in Vegas." Mara made a small choked sound behind me. I held up a hand, a silent command for her to stay quiet. "Vegas is a long way off, Sheriff," I said. "You must have the wrong people." "Do I?" He pushed himself off the fender and ambled a couple of steps closer. He moved with a deceptive looseness, like a big cat lazing in the sun. The description was pretty specific. A guy in a ruined suit looks like he's been wrestling with a trash compactor. And a dame, well, a dame who looks a lot like you, honey. He looked past me at Mara. His smile didn't change, but it got colder. "They said you were dangerous. They said you'd be scared. They didn't say you'd be stupid enough to come to Redemption Creek." This wasn't a cop. This was a wolf in a cheap uniform. He wasn't here to arrest us. He was here to collect us. Thurman and DeMarco's reach was longer than I'd imagined. They hadn't just sent the feds and a killer. They'd sent the local law, bought and paid for. "There's been a mistake," Mara said, her voice trembling, stepping forward and trying to look like a frightened tourist. It was a good performance, but Brody wasn't buying tickets. "Ma'am," he said, his voice turning hard as granite. "The only mistake was you two thinking you could stop for a coffee in my town. Now I'm going to ask you nice and polite. Step away from the door. We're going for a little ride." "And if we don't feel like a ride?" I asked. His hand dropped to the butt of the revolver on his hip. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. "Then I'll have to carry you. And I'm an old man. My back's not what it used to be. I might drop you. A lot." He was enjoying this. The power, the control. He had us cornered, and he was savoring the moment. That was his mistake. He was savoring it for a second too long. He took another step forward, his hand closing around the grip of his gun. That was my opening. I didn't throw a punch. I didn't go for a weapon. I did the one thing he wasn't expecting. I slammed the motel room door. It was a heavy, cheap, solid wood door, and it moved fast. It caught him square on the shoulder and side, knocking him off balance. He grunted in surprise and pain, stumbling back. His hand came off his gun as he tried to catch himself. I didn't wait to see him fall. I was already moving, bursting out of the room and grabbing him. I drove my knee into his gut. He folded like a cheap suit. I ripped the gun from his holster and shoved him hard. He fell back against his own car, his head hitting the roof with a dull thud. He slid to the ground, dazed and gasping for air. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't pretty. It was just fast and brutal. "Get in the car!" I yelled at Mara, who was standing in the doorway, her face a mask of shock. She scrambled for the passenger side of the sheriff's car. I jumped into the driver's seat. The keys were in the ignition. Brody was a professional, but he was a lazy one. He'd thought he had all the time in the world. I twisted the key. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spitting gravel, and fishtailed out of the motel parking lot. I didn't look back at the old clerk, who was probably watching the whole thing from his window with the same bored expression he'd had when we checked in. We were on the main road, heading east, away from Vegas, just as I'd planned. Only now we were in a stolen sheriff's car, with a stolen gun, and we'd just assaulted a law enforcement officer who was on the payroll of a senator and a mob boss. Mara was staring at me, her eyes wide. You hit him, she said, as if she couldn't quite believe it. He'll live, I said, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Probably. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The last stop motel was already shrinking in the distance. But it wasn't over. Brody would be on his radio in 2 minutes flat. Every cop in the state would be looking for this car. We had a new set of wheels, a new set of problems, and a whole state of law enforcement that would soon be hunting us. Welcome to the next level of hell. The sheriff's car smelled of stale coffee, old sweat, and the faint, coppery scent of Brody's fear. I drove with the windows down, the hot desert wind whipping through the car, trying to air out the stench of our desperation. We were a bright, moving target, a beacon for every lawman and lowlife in 3 states. He'll have a description of this car, Mara said, stating the obvious. He'll have called it in. No kidding, I said, my eyes scanning the empty road ahead. They'll be looking for a sheriff's car heading east, which is why we won't be heading east for long. I took a sharp turn onto a dirt road, a cloud of dust billowing up behind us. The car bounced and rattled, protesting the rough treatment. I drove for a mile until the road was completely obscured by the dust cloud we'd kicked up. Then I killed the engine. We walk from here, I said, getting out. We find a place to lie low until the heat dies down. And then what? She asked, getting out of the car. She looked small and fragile against the vast empty landscape. We can't run forever, Rick. No, I agreed, popping the trunk. Running is a temporary solution. We need a permanent one. Inside the trunk, along with a spare tire and a lot of dirt, was a roadside emergency kit. I found a flare gun. I also found Brody's spare shotgun, a pump-action 12-gauge that looked like it meant business. I took both. What's that for? Mara asked, eyeing the shotgun. Leverage, I said. I walked to a nearby gully, a dry scar in the earth. I pointed the flare gun at the sheriff's car and pulled the trigger. The flare shot out with a whoosh, a brilliant red star streaking through the daylight and hitting the car's gas tank. It didn't explode like in the movies. It just punctured the tank, and gasoline began to pour out onto the dirt. I waited until there was a decent puddle, then took a piece of rag from the emergency kit, stuffed it into the neck of the gas tank, and lit it with my lighter. I walked back to Mara. Let's go. We were 100 yards away when the car went up. It wasn't a huge Hollywood fireball, but a satisfying whoomph of orange flame and black smoke that rose into the clear blue sky like a signal flare. A signal that said, "We're done with this car. Come and find us now." It was a reckless, arrogant move. It was also a message. It told them we weren't just scared rabbits running for a hole. We were dangerous, and it might make them a little more cautious. We walked for what felt like hours, the sun beating down on us, until we found a small, dusty bus stop shelter, a lonely structure in the middle of nowhere. A schedule, faded and sun-bleached, showed 1 bus a day heading east, 1 heading west. The westbound bus had left an hour ago. The eastbound was due in 30 minutes. We're going back towards Vegas? Mara asked, confused. We're not getting on it, I said, but the people who get off it might have a car, or we can wait for the eastbound bus tomorrow. It was a gamble, a long, boring, hot gamble, but it was better than walking. We sat in the shade of the shelter, the silence between us thick and heavy. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a stark, ugly reality. We need to decide what to do with the tape, I said, breaking the silence. I told you, my buyer, Kaito, he was the one who was supposed to get it. He was the one who was supposed to get you, I corrected. He's not an option anymore. We can't sell it. We can't go to the cops. So what does that leave? She was quiet for a long time, staring out at the shimmering heat haze rising from the asphalt. There's a man, she said finally, her voice low. A journalist. His name is Ben Carter. He used to be a big shot at the Washington Post. Got fired for trying to run a story about Thurman's corruption a few years back. No one would touch it. He lives in a small town in Arizona now, writing a local column nobody reads. He hates Thurman. He hates him with a passion. A washed-up reporter with a grudge, I mused. That's your big plan? He's honest, she said, her voice firm. And he's got connections. Real ones, not the bought and paid for kind. If anyone can get this story out without getting us killed, it's him. It was a terrible plan. It was a long shot, a needle in a continent-sized haystack, but it was the only plan we had. It was a plan that involved trust, and I was fresh out of that. "And how do we know we can trust him?" I asked. "How do we know he won't sell us out for a byline?" "Because I have something on him," she said quietly. "Something personal, not for blackmail, for insurance. He'll know I'm serious." I looked at her. The girl who sold secrets had a secret of her own, a piece of leverage she'd kept in her back pocket. The shifting loyalties in this game were enough to give a man whiplash. Was she trying to save us, or was she just playing the next hand in a game I couldn't even see? Before I could answer, I saw a speck in the distance. The westbound bus from Vegas shimmering in the heat. It grew larger, a big, lumbering greyhound, a silver whale swimming through the desert. It slowed down and hissed to a stop in front of the shelter. The doors opened. Only one person got off. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a face that was handsome in a cold, brutal way. He was wearing a cheap suit that looked like it had been slept in, and he carried a small, worn-out overnight bag. He stepped onto the pavement, looked around, and his eyes fell on us. He didn't show any surprise. He didn't show any emotion at all. He just looked at us, a calm, assessing gaze. It was the cleaner. He hadn't been chasing us. He hadn't been tracking us. He'd been waiting for us. He'd known we'd be here. He'd known we'd be on this road, at this bus stop, at this time. He gave us a slight, polite nod, like we were old friends who'd arranged to meet. Then he started walking towards us, his hand casually slipping into his jacket. The world seemed to shrink to the space between us and him. The hot wind died. The hum of the bus's idling engine faded into a distant drone. There was only the crunch of his shoes on the gravel and the cold, dead certainty in his eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I presume," he said. His voice was the same soft, polite instrument I remembered from the compactor room. "Or should I say, Jane and whoever you are." The reservations seemed to be getting mixed up. He stopped about 10 feet from us. His hand was still in his jacket. He wasn't in a hurry. He was a man who had arrived on time for an appointment. "You're a long way from the Strip," I said, my hand resting on the shotgun I'd hidden behind the small bench of the bus shelter. "The service out here must be terrible for your employer." "He understands," the cleaner said, his gaze flicking to me, then to Mara. "He's a patient man, but his patience is wearing thin. He wants his property back, the recording, and he wants the loose ends tied up, neatly." He looked at Mara. "You were a very effective canary, my dear, but your song is over." Mara didn't flinch. The fear was still there, a wild animal in her eyes, but something else had taken its place, a cold, hard resolve I hadn't seen before. She took a step forward, away from me, towards him. "It's over," she said, her voice steady. "You win. We can't run forever." "Mara," I warned, my voice low. She ignored me. "He's right. The song is over. I don't want to die for this. It's not worth it." She slowly reached into her handbag. The cleaner's eyes followed her hand, his body tensing slightly, ready for any trick. "It's in here," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The original. Not a copy. The real thing. I'll give it to you. Just let us walk away. You can tell your boss we got scared. We tried to run, but we saw the futility of it. We just want to disappear." It was a good performance. The voice of a beaten woman, a con artist, finally admitting defeat. The cleaner was a professional, but he was also a man who liked to win. The idea of a clean, easy surrender, of getting the prize without a mess, would be appealing. "Let me see it," he said, his hand still in his jacket. "Of course," she said. She pulled her hand out of the bag. She wasn't holding a cassette. She was holding a small silver compact, the kind a woman uses for powder. She flipped it open. It wasn't powder inside. It was a blinding, intensely bright light, a high-intensity flashbulb wired to a battery in the compact's base. She pointed it right at his face and pressed the switch. The world went white. A star went off in the middle of the dusty road, a flash of pure, searing light that was brighter than the desert sun. The cleaner cried out, a raw, animal sound of shock and pain, stumbling back and clutching at his eyes. He was blinded. Temporarily, but it was all the time in the world. "Now, Rick," she screamed. I was already moving. I didn't bother with the shotgun. I lunged forward, not at the cleaner, but at the bus. The driver, a portly man with a bewildered expression, was staring at the flash of light. "Get us out of here!" I yelled, shoving the door open and grabbing him by the front of his shirt. Drive, or you're dead! Mara was right behind me. The cleaner was already recovering, shaking his head, trying to clear his vision. He was fumbling for his gun. The bus driver, a man who'd probably spent 30 years dealing with nothing more stressful than lost luggage, made a decision. He slammed his foot on the accelerator. The bus lurched forward, its doors hissing shut. I looked back. The cleaner had his gun out now. He fired. The bullet ricocheted off the side of the bus with a deafening clang. He fired again, shattering the back window. The bus was picking up speed, rumbling down the empty road. We were getting away. I sank into a seat, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mara was beside me, breathing heavily, the silver compact still clutched in her hand. "Where did you get that?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "A girl can't be too careful," she said, a flicker of the old dangerous smile returning to her lips, especially when she's in the business of selling secrets. I looked at her. The girl who sold midnight had just bought us a few more hours of darkness. She was a victim, a manipulator, a survivor. She was all of them, and none of them. The shifting loyalties in this mess weren't just a tactic, they were her nature. The bus was hurtling towards the unknown, a steel tube on wheels, a temporary sanctuary. But we weren't safe. We were just in a bigger cage, with a more dangerous predator waiting for us at the next stop. And I had a feeling he wouldn't be fooled by a flash of light again. The bus was a metal tube of collective panic. The driver, a man whose name tag read Earl, a different, less useful Earl, was muttering a prayer to a dashboard saint. The other passengers, a cross-section of middle American boredom, were now wide awake, their faces a mixture of confusion and terror. A woman in the back was starting to cry. "All right, Earl," I said, my voice low and steady. "Just drive, don't stop, don't call anyone. You do exactly what I say, and you'll be home in time for dinner." Who are you people?" he stammered, his eyes darting between me and the road. "We're the people who are saving you from a man with a gun," I said, which was technically true. "Now just drive." I moved down the aisle, the shotgun held loosely at my side. It was a prop, but it was a convincing one. The passengers shrank away from me, a wave of fear rippling through the bus. "Listen up," I said, my voice carrying over the low hum of the engine. "This is a hijacking, but it's a friendly one. Nobody has to get hurt. We just need a ride. You keep your phones in your pockets, you keep your mouths shut, and we all get to where we're going in one piece. Anyone feels like being a hero, you'll be dealing with me, and I'm having a very bad day." A man in a cheap suit, a traveling salesman with a face like a nervous weasel, started to stand up. "Now see here, you can't—" I didn't let him finish. I took 2 quick steps down the aisle and jammed the barrel of the shotgun against his temple. He froze, his eyes bulging. I said, "Sit down," I whispered. He sat down. Hard. That settled it. The bus was ours, a temporary kingdom on wheels, hurtling through the kingdom of the damned. I went back to the front, sinking into the seat across from Mara. She was watching me, a strange, unreadable expression on her face. "Nice light show," I said, nodding towards her compact, which she'd slipped back into her bag. "Anything else in there? A smoke bomb? A sword and a cane?" "Just my feminine wiles, Rick," she said, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "And they're starting to wear thin." "They're the only thing keeping us alive," I countered. "That was a good move. Where'd you get it?" "Kaito gave it to me," she said, her voice dropping. "He said it was for protection, in case a client got handsy. I guess he was thinking of a different kind of client." So Kaito, the double-crossing fence, had inadvertently given her the tool to escape his other client, the cleaner. The irony was thick enough to choke on. "We can't stay on this bus," I said. "They'll have roadblocks up ahead. They'll be watching the main routes." "So what do we do?" she asked. "We get off," I said. "Soon, we find another car, and we head for Arizona to find your ghost reporter." I had the driver pull over at a desolate crossroads marked by a single leaning signpost. One arrow pointed to nothing, the other to nowhere. It was perfect. "Everyone off," I said to the passengers. "Take your things. Start walking. The next town is about 10 miles that way." I pointed down the nothing road. They didn't argue. They scrambled off the bus, a trail of frightened humanity disappearing into the shimmering heat. I left Earl the driver with a $50 bill and the same story I'd given the truck driver. He didn't look grateful, just relieved to be alive. Mara and I stood alone by the side of the road as the bus, now empty, rumbled back to life and drove away, leaving us in a cloud of dust and silence. "Now what?" she asked, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Now we wait for a ride," I said. "Someone will come along eventually." We waited for an hour. The sun was merciless. The only sound was the buzz of flies. It was a purgatory of asphalt and heat. Finally, I saw a vehicle in the distance. It wasn't a cop car. It wasn't a truck. It was a long, sleek, black sedan, moving fast and silent, eating up the road. It was too clean, too expensive for this forgotten stretch of nowhere. It slowed down as it approached us, pulling over to the shoulder 100 yards away. The tinted window on the passenger side slid down with a soft electric hum. A man was sitting in the driver's seat. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a neatly trimmed white beard and sharp, intelligent eyes. He was wearing a crisp linen suit. He looked like a professor or a retired diplomat. He didn't look like a cop or a killer. He looked like something much, much more dangerous. "Rick Darby?" he asked, his voice calm and cultured. "And you must be Mara. My name is Kaido. I believe we have some business to discuss." The name hung in the hot, dead air like a sentence. Kaido, the puppet master, the ghost who had pulled all the strings, the one who had handed Mara the bait and then sent the dogs after her. And here he was, looking like he'd just stepped out of a penthouse boardroom. My hand tightened on the shotgun. "You've got a lot of nerve, showing your face out here." Kaido smiled, a thin, bloodless curving of the lips. It didn't reach his eyes. It probably hadn't in years. "Nerve is a commodity, Mr. Darby, one you seem to have in ample supply. Please, lower the weapon. It's so crude, and it won't do you any good." Mara was frozen beside me, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. This was the man she had trusted, the middleman who was her lifeline. Seeing him here, calm and in control, was like finding out your doctor was the one who poisoned you. "You set me up," she said, her voice a choked whisper. "I gave you an opportunity, my dear," Kaido corrected, his tone gentle, almost paternal. "A final test, and you performed adequately. The flash of light was a nice touch. Resourceful. I always knew you had potential." "Potential for what?" I snapped. "To end up in a ditch?" "To graduate," Kaido said simply. "The Gilded Cage was a classroom. You were my best student, Mara. You learned how to listen, how to blend in, how to be whatever a man needed you to be. You sell secrets because it's all you've been allowed to sell. I'm offering you a chance to sell something far more valuable." He gestured to the empty passenger seat. "Get in. Let's discuss this like civilized people. The alternative is to wait here for my associate. He's less civilized. And he's very annoyed about the compactor room. He's a man who holds a grudge." He was laying it all out. A choice between the devil in the crisp linen suit and the devil with the stiletto. It was no choice at all. "Why?" Mara asked, taking a step towards the car, drawn in despite herself. "Why all this? The tape, the setup. Why?" "Because Senator Thurman is a small-minded, greedy man," Kaido said, as if discussing a disappointing stock. "And Vinnie DeMarco is a brutish relic. They are useful tools, but they lack vision. They think power is about money and votes. They're wrong. True power is information. It's about knowing the secrets of men like them before they even know them themselves." He looked at Mara, and for the first time there was something like genuine admiration in his eyes. "You, my dear, are a natural-born intelligence asset. The tape was never for them. It was for me, a final project to prove you were ready for recruitment. I needed to know if you could handle pressure, if you could improvise, if you could survive when the game turned real. You did. With help," he added, glancing at me. "So what now?" I asked. "We just join your team? Forget the whole murder conspiracy thing?" "The conspiracy is irrelevant," Kaido said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Thurman and DeMarco will have their accident. Governor Reeves will have an unfortunate boating mishap. The world will keep turning. What matters is the information we gain from their replacements. The tape is simply a souvenir, a memento of your graduation day." He was offering her a job, not as a hostess or a con artist, but as a spy, a professional. He was offering her the world she'd been pretending to be a part of, but the reality was 1,000 times more dangerous. "And me?" I asked. "What's my graduation prize?" Kaido's gaze shifted to me, and it was like a sudden drop in temperature. "You, Mr. Darby, are a complication, a loose end, an unpredictable variable. I don't like loose ends. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. However, he continued, Mara seems attached to you, and a happy asset is a productive asset. So I'll make you an offer too. Walk away. Take the shotgun, take the bus driver's $50, and start walking. I'll give you a 10-minute head start. If you're very lucky, my associate won't find you. He looked from me to Mara, the choice hanging between us, sharp and cold as a shard of glass. Or, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, you can get in the car, Mara, and you, Mr. Darby, can stay here. Your choice. Her life for yours. A simple transaction. The offer hung there, slick and poisonous. A simple transaction. My life for hers. Kaito watched me, his eyes like a jeweler's loupe, examining me for flaws, for fear. He expected me to bargain, to beg, to try and find a way out. He was a man who believed every person had a price. He was right. But he didn't know my currency. I looked at Mara. Her face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. Fear, ambition, anger, and something else. Something I couldn't quite read. Was she actually considering it? A life in the shadows, but at the top of the food chain? It was the ultimate upgrade for a girl who sold secrets. 10 minutes, huh? I said, my voice casual. I shifted the shotgun to my other hand, a seemingly innocent movement. That's generous of you. Most men in your line of work don't give a head start. Kaito smiled, a predator's smile. I'm not most men, Mr. Darby. I appreciate efficiency. Efficiency, I repeated, nodding slowly. I took a step back, away from the car, away from Mara. It looked like I was taking the deal. It looked like I was choosing to live. You're right, it's been a long night. I'm tired of getting shot at. I'm tired of smelling like garbage. A man's got to know his limits. Mara's eyes widened. A flicker of hurt, or maybe betrayal, crossed her face. It was so quick I might have imagined it. Smart man, Kaito said, his voice smooth as silk. Survival is the most basic instinct. It is, I agreed. And then I swung the shotgun up, not at Kaito, but at the front tire of his sleek black sedan. I pulled the trigger. The roar of the 12-gauge was a physical blow in the silent desert air. The tire exploded with a deafening bang, the car lurching violently to one side. Kaito's calm, controlled facade shattered for a split second, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. That was the opening. Mara didn't hesitate. She didn't look back at me. She didn't thank me. She moved. She lunged for the car, not for the passenger door Kaito had offered, but for the driver's side. Kaito was fumbling inside his jacket, not for a gun, but for something else. A small black device, a remote. He was going to lock the doors or trigger something worse. He was too slow. Mara wrenched the driver's door open. She grabbed Kaito by his crisp linen suit and threw him out of the car with a strength born of pure desperation. He hit the ground hard, the remote flying from his hand and skittering across the asphalt. I was already moving. I ran to the passenger side and jumped in. Mara was behind the wheel, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the ignition. The key was in it. Go! I yelled. She slammed the car into drive. The engine screamed as the tires, one flat and three intact, dug into the dirt and asphalt. The car fishtailed, spraying gravel, and then shot forward, leaving Kaito standing in the middle of the road like a discarded mannequin. He watched us go, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't shout. He didn't wave his arms. He just stood there, a perfect, composed statue of rage, pulling a slim phone from his pocket. He was making a call. To the cleaner. We were roaring down the highway, a three-wheeled chariot of stolen luxury, leaving a trail of dust and a very powerful, very angry enemy in our wake. He's not going to stop, Mara said, her voice tight, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. I'm counting on it, I said, looking in the rear-view mirror at the shrinking figure of Kaito. We have his car, and I have a feeling there's more in here than just air conditioning. I started opening the glove compartment, the center console. I was looking for paperwork, a laptop, anything that could be a weapon. Kaito was a man who dealt in information. His car would be a mobile office. The first thing I found was a small leather-bound folder. Inside were a series of documents, all with the same letterhead, Blackwood Global Solutions. It was a private intelligence firm, a corporate spy agency. Kaito wasn't just a fence, he was the CEO of his own private CIA. And then I found it. Tucked into a side pocket of the folder was a single photograph. It was a picture of Mara, but she was younger, her hair shorter, her smile less practiced. She was standing with a man, an older man with a kind face and a sheriff's uniform. A uniform that looked a lot like the one Brody had been wearing. On the back of the photo, in neat, precise handwriting, were two words: leverage confirmed. I looked from the photo to Mara, who was staring grimly at the road ahead. The journalist in Arizona, the personal insurance she said she had on him. It was all a lie. Another layer in the endless, shifting maze of her life. The man in the photo wasn't a journalist. He was her father. And Kaito had known all along. The car was screaming, a high-pitched, rhythmic thump from the ruined tire that vibrated through the chassis and into my bones. But the noise inside the car was worse. It was the silence between us, thick and heavy with the photograph in my hand. I held it up. It was a flimsy, glossy thing, but it felt like it weighed a ton. "Care to explain this, Jane?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Or should I call you something else? Maybe sheriff's daughter?" Mara didn't look at me. Her eyes were locked on the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The car was pulling hard to the right, and she was fighting it with all her strength. "He's my father," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The journalist in Arizona," I said. "The man with the grudge against Thurman. That was a lie. Yes, a lie to protect him, or a lie to protect you." "Both," she said, her voice cracking. "He was the sheriff of Redemption Creek for 20 years, a good man. He got into debt, gambling. Vinnie DeMarco's people bailed him out. Then they owned him. They used him to move things through the county, things he didn't want to see." She finally risked a glance at me, her eyes filled with a pain that looked real. "Kaito found out. He came to my father. He offered a deal. He would erase the debt, make DeMarco go away if my father retired, and if I went to work for him." "So you became a spy to pay off Daddy's gambling debts," I said, the words tasting like ash. A classic story. "I did what I had to do," she shot back, the facade cracking. "I was a cocktail waitress in a dead-end town. Kaito offered me a life, a purpose. He trained me. He said I was a natural. The gilded cage, it was the first assignment, the final test." "And the leverage?" I asked, tapping the photo. "The note on the back." "Kato's insurance," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If I ever betrayed him or if I failed, my father would pay the price. DeMarco's people are still in Redemption Creek. They still remember him." It was a perfect twisted knot of loyalty and betrayal. She was working for the man who held her father's life in his hands. She was trying to survive in a game where every move was a trap. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "So the plan to go to the journalist," I said. "That was just another lie to get me to help you." "No," she said, shaking her head. "Ben Carter is real. He is a journalist. He was a friend of my father's. He's the only person I could think of who might be able to help. The only person Kaito doesn't own." It was another layer, another truth buried inside a lie, or was it a lie buried inside a truth? With her, I could never be sure. A loud bang from the rear of the car made us both jump. The flat tire had finally given up the ghost, shredding itself completely. The car swerved violently, and Mara wrestled it onto the shoulder, the engine coughing and dying. We were dead in the water again, a sitting duck in a very expensive, very broken car. "We have to go," she said, already opening her door. "They'll be tracking this car. They'll be here any minute." We got out, leaving the doors open. I took the shotgun in the folder from Blackwood Global Solutions. It was the only leverage we had left. We started walking, back into the endless desert, away from the road. There was no cover, just rocks and scrub brush and the merciless sun. "We can't keep running, Rick," Mara said, her voice ragged. "They have resources, money, people. They have a helicopter, for God's sake." As if on cue, I heard it, a faint whump, whump, whump sound far off in the distance. It was getting louder. I looked up. A black speck was growing in the vast, blue sky. It was a helicopter, and it was coming straight for us. Kaito wasn't just sending the cleaner, he was sending the cavalry. He was flushing us out of the desert, driving us like quail towards the guns. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. The hunt was over. They had us cornered, or so they thought. I looked at the folder in my hand. Blackwood Global Solutions, a corporate intelligence agency. They dealt in secrets, and I was holding a piece of their property, a piece that could ruin them. I looked at Mara, then at the approaching helicopter. A crazy, desperate, utterly insane idea started to form in my mind. It was the kind of idea that gets you killed or makes you a legend. There was no in between. I have a plan, I said, my voice calm. What is it? She asked, her eyes wide with terror as the sound of the helicopter grew louder, drowning out everything else. We're going to give them what they want, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. We're going to give them the tape. The sound of the helicopter was a physical presence now, a deep, thrumming vibration that shook the ground and churned the air into a dusty vortex. It was a black wasp descending from a blue sky, and we were the two ants it had come to sting. Give them the tape? Mara yelled over the roar, her face a mask of panic. Are you insane? They'll kill us! That's what they're going to do anyway, I shouted back, grabbing her arm and pulling her towards a small outcropping of red rocks. It wasn't much cover, but it was better than nothing. The only way to beat a con man is to run a better con. We scrambled behind the rocks just as the helicopter flared its landing, kicking up a blinding storm of sand and grit. I peered through a gap. The side door slid open. Two men in black tactical gear jumped out, assault rifles held at the ready. They fanned out, securing the area. Then, a third figure emerged. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit, completely impractical for the desert. He was calm, composed, and utterly out of place. It was the cleaner. He'd gotten a ride. He stood there, letting the dust settle around him, his eyes scanning the rocks. He knew we were here. He was just enjoying the moment. Mr. Darby, he called out, his voice somehow cutting through the rotor wash. Let's not prolong this. You have something that belongs to my employer. I have something you want, a quick and painless end. I took a deep breath. It was time to sell the performance of a lifetime. We have a counteroffer, I yelled back. There was a pause. The cleaner seemed genuinely intrigued. He gestured to his men to hold their position. I'm listening. The tape is yours, I shouted, but we're not giving it to you for free. We want a new car, a full tank of gas, and $1 million. Unmarked bills. You have 1 hour to get it here. Mara stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. $1 million? It was a ridiculous, audacious demand. It was also exactly the kind of thing a desperate, greedy man would ask for. The cleaner let out a short, humorless laugh. You're in no position to make demands. Aren't I? I yelled back. Because if we don't get what we want, I'm going to do something very, very foolish. I'm going to destroy this tape. I held up the microcassette for him to see. It was a tiny, insignificant thing, but to the men who wanted it, it was the world. You wouldn't, the cleaner called back, but there was a slight uncertainty in his voice now. Try me, I shouted. I've got nothing to lose, but your boss, he loses his presidency, he loses everything. You tell him that. You have 1 hour. I ducked back behind the rocks, my heart hammering against my ribs. Are you crazy? Mara hissed. They're just going to storm us. No, they won't, I said, my mind racing. Kaido is a businessman. He doesn't like unnecessary risk, and he doesn't like loose ends. He'll see this as a negotiation. He'll buy time to figure out a way to get the tape without paying us. And what do we do in that hour? She asked. We don't have an hour, I said, pulling the Blackwood Global folder from my jacket. We have about 10 minutes, before he realizes it's a bluff. I opened the folder, spreading the documents out on the dusty ground. Client lists, operation reports, financial records. It was a treasure trove of corporate and political espionage. The tape is about 1 murder, I said, my voice low and urgent. This is about 100. This is Kaido's real empire. This is what he can't afford to lose. I took out my phone. I had no signal, but that didn't matter. I had a new camera, and I took a picture of every single page. High-resolution images of every dirty secret Blackwood Global had. What are you doing? Mara asked. I'm making a dead man's switch, I said. I'm emailing these to a secure encrypted server. If I don't log in and cancel it in 12 hours, the entire contents of this folder get sent to every major news outlet in the country. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Associated Press, everyone. I worked fast, my fingers flying across the screen, uploading the pictures. The helicopter's engine was still running, a constant, menacing thrum. Okay, I said, tucking the phone away. It's done. Now for the fun part. I took the microcassette and the empty folder. I stood up, holding my hands in the air. I'm coming out, I yelled. Don't shoot. I walked out from behind the rocks, slowly, deliberately. The cleaner watched me, his men raising their rifles. "I've been thinking," I said, stopping about 20 feet from them. $1 million is a bit gauche, isn't it? Let's renegotiate." I tossed the empty blackwood folder onto the ground between us. "You can have the tape, but first, you tell Kaido that if anything happens to me or the girl, his entire company goes up in smoke. He knows what I mean." The cleaner's eyes narrowed. He didn't know about the folder's contents, but he knew I was holding something back. He was a professional, and he recognized a new variable in the equation. "And how do I know you're not bluffing?" he asked. "You don't," I said with a shrug. "That's the beauty of it. Are you willing to bet your boss's entire operation on a hunch?" I held up the microcassette between my thumb and forefinger. "The tape for our lives, and a car. That's the final offer. Take it or leave it." The silence stretched, broken only by the helicopter. The cleaner was weighing his options. He was a killer, but he was also an employee. He had to follow orders, and his orders were to get the tape and minimize collateral damage. A full-scale exposure of his employer was a lot of collateral damage. He nodded slowly, a grudging respect in his eyes. "Get in the helicopter." "Not a chance," I said. "You bring us a car, a working one. You leave it on the road. You and your boys get back in your flying taxi and leave. When you're gone, we'll put the tape under the front seat. Then we walk away. Everyone wins." It was a crazy, ridiculous plan. But it was the only one that had a chance of working. The cleaner considered it for a long moment. Then he took out his phone. He made a call, spoke a few quiet words, and hung up. "You have a deal," he said. "But know this, Mr. Darby, this isn't over. My employer doesn't like to be threatened." "Join the club," I said. He and his men got back into the helicopter. The door slid shut. The black wasp rose into the air, turned and flew away, leaving us alone in the vast, silent desert once more. Mara ran out from behind the rocks, her face a mixture of relief and disbelief. "I can't believe that worked." "It hasn't yet," I said, my eyes on the empty sky. I pulled out my phone. The upload was complete. The dead man's switch was armed. "Now," I said, a slow, grim smile spreading across my face, "let's go see what kind of car they left us. And then we're going to pay a visit to that washed-up journalist in Arizona. Because now we don't just have a tape. We have an entire network of secrets to burn to the ground." The silence that followed the helicopter's departure was the kind you could bottle and sell as peace of mind, but you knew it was just flat soda. The desert rushed back in to fill the void, all heat and emptiness. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. The dead man's switch was a cold digital bomb ticking away in my pocket. 12 hours. That was our new lifespan. "I don't believe it," Mara said, her voice shaky. "We're alive." "We're temporarily not dead," I corrected, my eyes scanning the empty horizon. "There's a difference. They'll be watching. The car they leave us will have a tracker. They'll have a tail a mile back." As if on cue, a speck appeared in the distance. It wasn't a helicopter. It was a car, a dusty, nondescript sedan, the color of faded road dust. It drove itself down the road and stopped 100 yards away, the engine idling, the driver's door hanging open. An invitation, or a trap. "See," I said, "a gift horse. Let's go check its teeth." We approached it cautiously. It was a standard American-made bucket of bolts, the kind of car that's invisible on any highway. Inside, on the passenger seat, was a bottle of water and a new cheap burner phone. Classy. I popped the trunk. Nothing. I got on my back and slid under the chassis. It was dirty, greasy, and hot as hell. I ran my hands along the frame, the exhaust pipe, the wheel wells, and there it was. Not a cheap magnetic box like the one in her shoe. This was a professional job. A small black transmitter welded neatly inside the rear bumper housing. It was part of the car. "They're good," I said, sliding out from under the car and wiping the grease from my hands. "They want to know where we're going." "So what do we do?" Mara asked, her hopes starting to curdle. "We give them what they want," I said, a plan already forming. For a little while, anyway. We got in the car. I took the burner phone in the water. I didn't touch the transmitter. They'd know if we disabled it. "Head east," I said, "towards Arizona." Mara drove. The car was a rattletrap, but it ran. We drove for 2 hours, putting as much distance between us and the drop point as we could. The burner phone remained silent. They were just watching, waiting for us to lead them to the tape. We found another dusty crossroads, this one with a boarded-up gas station and a rusted-out pickup truck sitting behind it. The truck looked like it hadn't moved in 20 years, but the tires were inflated. A good sign. "This is our ride," I said, getting out of the sedan. I hot-wired the pickup. It coughed, sputtered, then roared to life with a sound like an angry giant. It was ugly, loud, and perfect. I left the sedan running, the door open, and drove the truck away, heading south on a dirt road that wasn't on any map. We'd give them a few hours of following the sedan east before they realized it was a ghost car. By then, we'd be long gone. It took us another day of back-road driving and switching rides to finally cross into Arizona. The landscape didn't change. It was still a vast, indifferent wasteland, but it felt different. It felt like we were running out of road. The town of Dust Devil, Arizona, looked like it had been left out in the sun to dry for about a century. The main street was a collection of faded storefronts and saloons that had seen better centuries. We found the local newspaper office, a small, dusty space above a barber shop with a sign that read, "The Dust Devil Chronicle. All the news that fits." The man inside was exactly what I expected. Ben Carter was in his late 50s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from an old leather suitcase. He was unshaven, his shirt was stained with whiskey, and he was staring at a blank computer screen with the weary resignation of a man who had already lost the war. "What do you want?" he grunted, not even looking up as we walked in. "We're looking for Ben Carter," I said. "You found him," he said. "Now get lost, I'm on a deadline." I looked at the blank screen. "Busy day." He finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot and filled with a deep, simmering anger. "Look, pal, I don't know if you're selling something, begging for something, or trying to save my soul, but I'm not interested. This town is dead, and so am I. Now beat it." "We have a story for you, Mr. Carter," Mara said, stepping forward. Her voice was soft, respectful. "A big one." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Honey, I wrote the book on big stories. I had a big story once. It cost me my job, my wife, and my house in Georgetown. All I got for it was this office and a liver that's staging a protest. So whatever you've got, I can guarantee you, I don't care." "It's about Senator Thurman," I said. That got his attention. His eyes narrowed, the flicker of an old fire in their depths. "Thurman's a cockroach. You can't kill him. I tried." "This is different," Mara said. "We have proof. Proof of a conspiracy, a murder plot." He leaned back in his chair, a cynical smile on his lips. "Proof? Everyone has proof. A tape, a document, a mysterious source. It's all garbage without a platform. And I don't have a platform. I have a dusty office and a bottle of cheap bourbon." He was dismissing us. He was too beaten down, too cynical to believe. I knew then that words weren't enough. I pulled out my phone. I didn't show him the recording of Thurman and DeMarco. That was too small. I scrolled through the images I'd taken from the Blackwood Global folder. I found the one I was looking for. A memo. An internal Blackwood report detailing a disinformation campaign against a troublesome journalist at the Washington Post. The report outlined how they'd planted false sources, fabricated evidence, and used their media contacts to destroy the man's reputation. The journalist's name was at the top of the page. Ben Carter. I turned the phone around and showed it to him. He stared at the screen. The cynical smirk slowly melted from his face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He reached out with a trembling hand and took the phone, zooming in on the text on the Blackwood Global letterhead. He looked up at us, his eyes no longer weary and beaten. They were burning with a cold, hard fire that I recognized instantly. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Let's just say we acquired it from a mutual acquaintance," I said. "A man named Kaito." Carter's face hardened. Kaito. I knew that name was involved. He was the source who fed me the bad intel. He stood up, a new energy in his movements. He walked to the window and looked down at the empty street. "You don't know what you've walked into," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you have a story? You have a war. These people, they don't play politics. They erase people." "We know," Mara said. "Then you're bigger fools than I thought," he said, turning back to face us. "But you've also got the match. And I've been waiting a long, long time to burn this whole damn thing down." He picked up his bottle of bourbon and took a long, straight swallow. "All right," he said, slamming the bottle down on the desk. "Let's get to work. But you should know, Kaito's not the only one who's been watching me. Thurman has people in this town. They've been keeping an eye on me for years. You two just walked into a hornet's nest." Carter's words hung in the stale air of the office, a death sentence pronounced in a monotone. A hornet's nest. I didn't need to look out the window to know he was right. My skin was already crawling. "How long?" I asked, my voice low. "They're not subtle," Carter said, walking to a grimy window and peering through a crack in the blinds. "There's a black sedan parked across the street. Been there for an hour. 2 guys inside. They look like they're wearing their father's suits. Thurman's special brand of gorilla." I joined him at the window. He was right. The car was a piece of government-issue muscle, dark and gleaming under the Arizona sun. It was an ugly, aggressive thing in a town that had forgotten how to be aggressive. "They're not here to talk," I said. "No," Carter agreed. "They're here to make sure I don't. And now that you're here, they're waiting for their orders, or for the right moment to snatch you." "So we're trapped," Mara said, the fear back in her voice, sharp and real. "Only if we stay here," Carter said. He turned from the window, a new, dangerous light in his eyes. The cynical drunk was gone, replaced by the journalist who'd once taken on a senator. "You came to me for a platform. I'm going to give you one. But we have to move. Now." He moved to a large steel filing cabinet in the corner of the room. It was the only thing in the office that looked solid and expensive. He spun the dial on a combination lock. "This town is dead, but its bones are still strong. There's a network of service tunnels under the main street, left over from the mining days. They connect most of the buildings." The lock clicked open. He pulled open a drawer, but it wasn't filled with files. It was filled with whiskey, ammunition, and a set of old, well-oiled revolvers. He took 2 and tossed one to me. It was a heavy .38 Special, cold and reassuring in my hand. "Welcome to Dust Devil," he said with a grim smile, tucking the other gun into his waistband. He kicked at the baseboard behind the cabinet. A section of the floor popped up, revealing a dark, narrow opening and a set of rickety wooden stairs leading down into the earth. "The old printing press is 2 blocks down," he said. "It's been abandoned for 30 years. No one goes there. It'll be our fortress." A floorboard creaked downstairs in the barber shop, a heavy, deliberate footstep. "They're getting impatient," I said. "Go," Carter ordered Mara. "Rick, you're next. I'll cover our retreat." Mara didn't argue. She disappeared into the hole. I followed, the .38 in my hand. I was halfway down the ladder when I heard the door to the office splinter open. "Police! Federal agents! Nobody move!" a voice yelled. It was a bad lie, told badly. I heard Carter laugh, a short, bitter sound, then the roar of the revolver. The sound was deafening in the small office, a thunderclap of defiance. Glass shattered. A man yelled in pain and surprise. I scrambled down the rest of the ladder into the darkness. Carter was right behind me, pulling the trapdoor shut. We were plunged into absolute blackness, the smell of damp earth and rust filling our lungs. "This way," Carter's voice echoed in the dark. We moved through the tunnel, a cramped, suffocating space. The sounds from above were muffled, but we could hear shouting, more footsteps. They were in the office. They'd found the opening. We stumbled along, our hands brushing against the damp, earthen walls. After what felt like an eternity, we saw a sliver of light ahead. Carter pushed open a heavy, rusted metal door, and we spilled out into a vast, cavernous space. It was the old printing press, a cathedral of forgotten industry. Huge, hulking machines stood like silent iron gods, draped in cobwebs and thick layers of dust. The air was thick with the ghostly smell of ink and paper. It was a place where stories used to be born, a perfect tomb for the one that could kill a presidency. "They'll find this place," I said, my eyes scanning the shadows. "Eventually," Carter conceded, walking over to one of the massive presses. "But it'll take them time, and time is what we need." He ran his hand over a large, flat metal plate. "This is a linotype machine, and this," he said, pointing to a towering press next to it, "is a rotary press. It can print 10,000 copies an hour." "You can't be serious," Mara said, looking at the ancient, rusted machinery. "You want to print the story here? On this?" "Exactly," Carter said, his eyes gleaming with a fanatical fire. "Kaito and Thurman are watching the digital world. They're monitoring emails, servers, phone lines. They'll be expecting you to try and upload the files again. They'll be ready for it. but they're not going to be looking for a 100-year-old printing press to come back to life in the middle of nowhere. He started pulling levers and checking gauges on the old machine. It'll take me a few hours to get her warmed up, but I can do it. I can print a special edition of the Dust Devil Chronicle, one that tells the whole story. The murder plot, the Blackwood files, everything. And then what? I asked. Hand out copies on the street corner? No, he said, a grim smile on his face. I have a distribution list, a network of old-school journalists who, like me, were burned by the system. They're scattered all over the country, working for small papers, running blogs, waiting for a chance to get back in the fight. If I can get these papers to them, they'll get them out. It'll be a flood they can't stop. 100 small fires starting at once. It was a mad, brilliant, analog plan in a digital world. It was our only shot. As Carter started working on the press, a low hum filling the silent room, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It wasn't the burner phone. It was my own. There was a text message from an unknown number. The message was short, simple, and utterly terrifying. The clock is ticking, Rick, but not the one you think. Check your dead man's switch. The text message was a lit match dropped on a pool of gasoline. My blood went cold. The dead man's switch. The one card I had left to play. The one thing Kaito was supposed to be afraid of. He wasn't afraid. He was amused. What is it? Mara asked, seeing the look on my face. I didn't answer. I pulled up the browser on my phone, my fingers fumbling as I typed in the URL for the secure server. The login screen appeared. I typed in my username and password. Access granted. The screen loaded. The files were there. All the pictures I'd taken of the Blackwood Global folder. They were queued, ready to be sent. The countdown timer was still running. 11 hours, 47 minutes. It was working. So what was the message talking about? I clicked on the recipient list. My heart sank into my shoes. The list of news agencies, the Times, the Post, the AP was gone. In their place was a single email address. It was an address I didn't recognize, but the domain name was unmistakable. mail.blackwoodglobal.com. He didn't disable it, I said, my voice hollow. He changed it. Carter stopped what he was doing and walked over. Changed what? The dead man's switch, I said, showing him the screen. If I don't log in to cancel it, the files don't go to the press. They go to him. He gets his own property back, and we look like incompetent fools who tried to blackmail him with his own information. Carter stared at the screen, his face a mask of grim understanding. He's not just a spy, he muttered. He's a ghost in the machine. He owns the wires. He's been playing us from the beginning, I said, the full, ugly scope of Kaito's operation crashing down on me. The tracker in the shoe, the listening device in the motel, the buyer who was his own man, he let us escape. He let us think we were winning. He's hurting us, Mara. Just like he said. He's not trying to catch us. He's trying to break us. So it's over, she whispered, the fight draining out of her. We have nothing. No, I said, my voice hardening. We have this. I tapped the screen of my phone. He thinks he's won. He thinks we're cornered. He's waiting for us to make a mistake. So we're not going to play his game anymore. I looked at Carter. Your plan, the analog plan, it's all we have left. He's not expecting that. He's so busy watching the digital world, he won't see a bunch of old iron coming back to life. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Carter's face. He's looking for a signal in the noise. We're not going to make a sound, we're going to make a roar. He turned back to the press. It'll take time, and it'll be loud. When this thing starts up, they'll know exactly where we are. Then we'd better work fast, I said. The next few hours were a blur of frantic, greasy work. Carter was a madman, a poet of rust and oil. He coaxed the old machines back to life, his hands moving with a practiced grace that belied his drunken cynicism. Mara and I were his assistants, cleaning nozzles, loading giant rolls of yellowed paper that smelled like history, and keeping watch. The sounds from the street above grew more frequent. We heard sirens in the distance. They were setting up a perimeter. They knew we were in the area. They were just waiting for Kaito's order. Finally, Carter wiped his greasy hands on an even greasier rag. She's ready, he said, a look of fierce pride on his face. Let's print a revolution. He fed a large metal plate into the press. On it, etched in reverse, was the headline, Senator Plots Murder, Spy Kingpin Exposed. He grabbed a large lever. Hold on to something, he yelled. He pulled the lever down with all his strength. For a second, there was nothing. Then, with a groan that shook the very foundations of the building, the ancient rotary press roared to life. It was a deafening, bone-rattling cacophony of grinding metal and hissing steam. The entire room vibrated, dust and cobwebs raining down from the ceiling. A huge sheet of paper shot out of the machine, the ink still wet, the words stark and black and true. It was the most beautiful, terrifying sound I had ever heard. It was also a beacon, a loud, undeniable announcement to the men upstairs that we were here and we were not going down quietly. From the street, we heard the squeal of tires and the sound of car doors slamming. They were coming. The roar of the press was a war cry. It shook the dust from the rafters and vibrated in my teeth. It was the sound of truth being forged in fire and oil, and it was the loudest sound in the world. "They're here!" I yelled over the din, pointing my .38 at the main doors. Carter didn't even look up from his machine, a mad prophet at his pulpit. "Let them come. This press has outlasted governments. It can outlast a few cheap thugs." The first explosion wasn't a gunshot. It was the front doors, splintering inwards under the force of a battering ram. Two figures in dark suits stormed in, guns raised. I didn't hesitate. I fired twice. The .38 kicked like a mule. The first shot went wide, ricocheting off a massive iron roller with a deafening ping. The second caught the first man in the shoulder. He spun around and went down, his gun clattering on the concrete floor. The second man dived behind a stack of old paper pallets. He opened fire, the shots echoing in the vast space, chewing up the machinery near Carter's head. "Get down from there, you old fool," I yelled. "This is my church." Carter roared back, pulling another lever. A fresh sheet of paper, hot and slick with ink, shot out of the press. The headline was a scream in the silence between gunshots. "Senator plots murder." More men were coming in through the broken doors, fanning out, using the colossal machines for cover. We were outgunned, outmanned, and trapped in a noisy, brightly lit coffin. "They're trying to flank us," Mara screamed, pointing towards a dark side passage. "The loading dock." She was right. I could see the beam of a flashlight cutting through the gloom. They were going to surround us. "I can't hold them," I yelled, firing another shot that sent a chunk of concrete flying. "You don't have to," Carter shouted back, his face slick with sweat and grease. He pointed to a massive canvas chute, a giant tube that disappeared into the floor. "The coal delivery. It leads to the basement. It's our only way out." The press was still roaring, spewing out its revolutionary manifesto with every thunderous cycle. It was our weapon, our shield, and our siren song. "Go," Carter ordered, grabbing a heavy iron wrench from a tool chest. "I'll keep them entertained. Get the papers out of here. That's all that matters." He wasn't asking, he was telling. This was his story, and this was how it was going to end. Not in a dusty office with a bottle of bourbon, but in a blaze of ink and gunfire, defending the one thing that still mattered to him. "Ben," Mara started, her voice breaking. "Go," he yelled, and then he charged out from behind the press, swinging the wrench like a medieval knight. He was a drunk, a cynic, a failure, and in that moment, he was the bravest man I'd ever seen. There was no time to argue. I grabbed a thick bundle of the freshly printed papers. They were still warm, the ink smudging on my fingers. I shoved them into a canvas mail sack I found on the floor. "Come on," I yelled to Mara, pulling her towards the coal chute. We scrambled to the opening. It was a dark, greasy slide that dropped into an unknown darkness. Behind us, the sounds of the fight intensified. The roar of the press, the crack of Carter's revolver, the thud of the wrench, and the angry shouts of the men trying to bring him down. "You first," I said, giving her a push. She didn't hesitate. She disappeared into the darkness. I took one last look back. I saw Carter standing his ground, a solitary figure against a tide of shadows, the press behind him thundering its defiance. Then a flashlight beam found him, and the world exploded in a hail of gunfire. I didn't wait to see the outcome. I jumped into the chute. It was a fast, slick, terrifying slide down into the guts of the building. I landed in a heap in a pile of dusty, forgotten coal in the basement. Mara was already there, helping me up. We could hear the chaos from above, the muffled gunfire, the relentless roar of the press, and then a new sound. The grinding, groaning sound of machinery giving up. The press sputtered, coughed, and then, with a final mournful sigh, it fell silent. The silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than the noise had been. Carter was gone. "We have to go," I said, my voice hoarse. I grabbed the mail sack of newspapers. It was heavy. It was precious. It was the only thing that mattered now. We found a set of stairs that led up to a ground-level door. It was locked, but it was old. I put my shoulder to it, and with a splintering crash, it gave way. We stumbled out into a dusty alley behind the building. The sun was setting, painting the town in a bloody, unforgiving red. The sounds of sirens were getting closer. We were out. But we were two people on foot, in a town that was about to be swarming with enemies, carrying a sack full of the most dangerous news in the country. The hunt was far from over. It had just entered its final, brutal phase. The alley was a narrow canyon of shadows, and the setting sun painted the bricks in long, bloody streaks. The sirens were closer now, a pack of wolves closing in for the kill. My ears were still ringing from the silence that had followed the press's death roar. Carter was gone. A good man, a dead man, and the weight of his sacrifice felt as heavy as the sack of newspapers in my hand. "We can't stay here," I said, my voice a raw whisper. Mara was leaning against the brick wall, her face pale and streaked with grime. She wasn't crying. She was staring at the sack of papers, her expression a mixture of horror and fierce, hard resolve. The girl who sold secrets was now the keeper of the most dangerous one in the country. "Where do we go?" she asked. "They'll have every road out of this town blocked in 5 minutes." "They'll be looking for a car," I said, my mind racing. "Something fast, something that stands out, so we're not going to get a car." I looked around the alley. It was a dead end, filled with dumpsters and the ghosts of bad decisions. But behind one of the dumpsters, half buried in rubble, was a garage door. A faded sign above it read, "Silas's Auto Repair. If it's broke, I can fix it, probably." It was a long shot, a desperate, stupid shot, but it was the only one we had. I tried the door. It was locked. I didn't have time for finesse. I kicked it hard right next to the handle. The wood splintered. I kicked it again, and the lock gave way. We slipped inside into the gloom. The garage smelled of oil, gasoline, and decades of quiet competence. An old pickup truck was up on blocks, its engine disassembled on a tarp. Tools were hung on the walls with a meticulous care that spoke of a man who loved his work. A man emerged from under the truck, wiping his hands on a rag. He was old, with a face like a dried riverbed and a shock of white hair. He was thin, wiry, and his eyes were a pale, washed-out blue. He looked at us, not with fear, but with a weary annoyance. "The sign says closed," he grunted, "and even if it was open, I don't fix trouble." "We're not here for a repair, Silas," I said, reading his name off his greasy overalls. "We're here for a tow." He squinted at me, then at Mara, then at the canvas sack I was holding. "You're the folks Carter was making all that noise about. I could hear the ruckus from clear over here." "He's dead," Mara said, her voice flat. Silas's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, old pain maybe, crossed his eyes. "Figured as much. Ben always did like to tilt at windmills. What's in the bag?" "The reason he's dead," I said, "and the reason they're going to tear this town apart looking for us. We need a way out, a tow truck, something that won't get a second glance at a roadblock." He was silent for a long moment, just looking at us. He was weighing the risk, the trouble, against a debt to a dead friend. "The feds are already here," he said, nodding towards the front of the garage. "They're setting up a perimeter. They won't be looking for a tow truck going out of town. They'll be looking for one coming in to clear the wreckage." He walked over to a corner of the garage and pulled a dusty tarp off a vehicle. It was an old, heavy-duty tow truck, a behemoth of rust and dented chrome. It looked like it had been built in the same era as the printing press. "She ain't pretty," Silas said, patting the hood, "but she's got a V8 engine that'll pull a house off its foundations, and the plates are registered to a salvage company that went bankrupt 10 years ago. She's a ghost." He tossed me the keys. "There's a back road that leads out of the canyon. It's not on any map. It'll get you to the highway north of the roadblocks. Go, and don't come back." He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for anything. He was just paying a debt. "Thank you," Mara said, her voice soft. Silas just grunted and turned back to his disassembled engine, a man who wanted no more part of a world that killed men like Ben Carter. We got in the tow truck. The engine turned over with a deep, powerful rumble that felt like the earth itself was waking up. I drove it out the back, through a junkyard filled with the skeletons of cars, and onto the dirt track Silas had mentioned. We were out of Dust Devil, but we weren't safe. We were just two more ghosts on a lonely road, carrying a sack full of dynamite. I drove for an hour, putting as much distance as we could between us and the town. The sun had set, and the desert was a vast, black ocean under a canopy of cold, indifferent stars. The burner phone on the seat buzzed. I looked at Mara. She nodded, her face grim. I answered it. "Mr. Darby," Kaito's voice said. It was calm, smooth, and utterly infuriating. "I must say I'm disappointed. I expected a more elegant solution. A printing press? So theatrical. So analog." "Your man seemed to appreciate the theatrics," I said, my voice cold. "A necessary loss," Kaito said dismissively. "But the exercise is over. You have the papers. I have the names and addresses of every journalist on Carter's little distribution list. I'm sending my own messengers to have a chat with them. A very persuasive chat. Your little fire is going to be extinguished before it even has a chance to start." My blood ran cold. He hadn't just been watching us. He'd been one step ahead the entire time. "You're a monster," I said. "I'm a businessman," he corrected. "And you, Mr. Darby, are a failed negotiator. But I'm a fair man. I'm going to give you one last chance to end this with a shred of dignity." He paused, letting the threat sink in. "There's a small private airfield about 20 miles from your current location. It's called Coyote Run. Be there in 1 hour. Come alone. Bring the papers. We will make an exchange, the papers for the girl and for your life." He hung up. I looked at Mara. Her face was a mask of stone, but I could see the terror in her eyes. "He's not going to let us go," she said. "No," I agreed. "He's not. He's just luring us to the killing ground. He wants to do this in person, to watch." I stared at the dark road ahead. We had the proof, we had a vehicle, but we were out of time, out of options, and out of allies. Kaito had checkmated us. But as I looked at the sack of newspapers on the seat between us, a different kind of idea began to form. A desperate, last-gasp plan that was so crazy it might just work. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about making sure that if we went down, we took the whole rotten kingdom with us. "He wants a show," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "Let's give him one he'll never forget." The plan was a suicide note written in grease and gasoline. I laid it out for Mara as the tow truck rumbled through the dark, the headlights cutting 2 weak tunnels in the overwhelming blackness. "He wants a final scene," I said, my voice low and steady. "He wants to stand there in his expensive suit and watch us crumble. He's a director, and he's written his own grand finale." "And we're just supposed to walk into it?" she asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "No," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "We're going to rewrite the ending. He's expecting a negotiation, a surrender. We're going to give him a demolition." I explained the plan. It was simple, brutal, and relied on Kaito's arrogance being bigger than his common sense. The tow truck wasn't just a vehicle. It was a weapon. A big, slow, ugly weapon. "He'll have his jet there," I said. "A symbol of his power, his escape route. We're not going to let him escape. We're going to wreck it. We're going to take his symbol of power and turn it into a pile of scrap right in front of him." Mara listened, her fear slowly being replaced by the same hard, dangerous resolve I'd seen in the printing press office. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a soldier. "What about the papers?" she asked, touching the canvas sack. "We can't let him have them all," I said. "But we can't let them die with us either. You're going to take half. You're going to get to that plane and you're going to stuff them into the engine, the air intake, everywhere. A paper bomb. It won't stop him from getting another jet, but it'll make a statement. The truth choking the machine." It was a mad, poetic gesture. It was perfect. Coyote Run Airfield was exactly what I expected. A desolate strip of asphalt in the middle of nowhere, lit by a few lonely floodlights that created deep pockets of shadow. A single, modern hangar stood at one end, and parked in front of it, sleek and predatory under the lights, was a private jet. A Gulfstream, white and silver, gleaming like a predator's tooth. We parked the tow truck behind a derelict hangar 100 yards away, killing the engine and the lights. The silence that rushed in was absolute. "He's here," Mara whispered, pointing. A long black sedan, the same model as the one in Dust Devil, pulled up next to the jet. Kaido got out of the back, followed by the cleaner. They were calm, unhurried. They owned the night. Okay, I said, my heart a cold stone in my chest. You know your part. I'll create the diversion. When you see me move, you go for the plane. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the jet. She took half the newspapers from the sack, tucking them under her arm like a football. I got out of the truck, the .38 in my hand. I didn't try to hide. I walked out of the shadows and into the light, halfway between our truck and their sedan. Kaido saw me. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the cleaner, who hung back, a shadow ready to strike. Kaido walked towards me alone, his hands clasped behind his back, a headmaster strolling out to meet a disobedient student. "Mr. Darby," he said, his voice echoing in the still night air. "Punctual. I appreciate that. Where is the girl? And my property?" "She's close," I said, "and the property is the reason we're here. You want it. We want to live. Let's talk." "Talk time is over," Kaido said, his smile thin and sharp. "You have 1 minute to produce the papers and the girl. After that, my associate will be forced to get messy." "Before you do that," I said, raising my voice slightly, "you should know something. This was never about the money for us. It was about the story. And some stories you just can't bury." It was the signal. As I spoke, I saw a flicker of movement in the shadows by the hangar. Mara, making her run towards the jet. Kaido, focused on me, didn't see her. The cleaner did. His head snapped towards the movement. He was fast, but Mara was faster. She was a ghost in a torn dress, sprinting across the tarmac. The cleaner started to raise his gun. That was my cue. I didn't raise my .38. I turned and ran, not away from them, but back towards the tow truck, diving into the driver's seat. "Hey!" Kaido yelled, his composure finally cracking. "Stop them!" I slammed the door and turned the key. The engine roared to life. I slammed the truck into gear and stomped on the accelerator. The old beast lurched forward, a charging rhino. The cleaner was a professional. He ignored me, focusing on the bigger threat, Mara, who was already at the jet, stuffing newspapers into the engine's massive intake. He raised his gun, taking careful aim. He never got the shot off. I swung the tow truck's boom, the heavy steel arm extending out to the side. I aimed it at the sleek, beautiful tail of the Gulf Stream. I hit the switch for the winch. The thick steel cable shot out, a metal whip uncoiling with terrifying speed. The heavy hook on the end didn't just hit the plane. It tore through the fuselage like it was tinfoil, ripping a huge, gaping hole in the tail section. The sound was an unholy screech of tearing metal. The cleaner spun around, his eyes wide with disbelief. He raised his gun towards me. I didn't give him the chance. I swung the boom again, this time catching the sedan he and Kaido had arrived in. The hook snagged the roof, and with a groan of protesting metal, I lifted the car into the air, tilting it until it spilled Kaido and the cleaner onto the tarmac like dice from a cup. It was chaos. Kaido was on the ground, his perfect suit covered in dust, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The cleaner was already up, his gun up, firing. Bullets ricocheted off the tow truck's grill and windshield. I ducked, my foot still jammed on the accelerator. Mara had finished her work. She was running back towards me, her face lit by the floodlights, a wild, triumphant look in her eyes. I kept the truck moving, a slow, lumbering circle, keeping the boom spinning like a deadly flail, forcing them to keep their distance. "Get in!" I yelled. She scrambled into the passenger side as bullets pinged off the truck's door. I didn't wait. I drove the tow truck straight at the damaged jet, not stopping, not slowing down. The steel grille slammed into the jet's landing gear. There was a groan of stressed metal, and the entire plane listed to one side, its wings scraping the ground. It was wrecked. A total, beautiful wreck. I spun the wheel, turning the truck and roaring away from the airfield, back towards the dark road, leaving Kaido and the cleaner standing in the ruins of their power, stranded and defeated. We didn't speak for the first 10 miles. We just drove, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a strange, quiet sense of victory. We hadn't won. Not really. We were still fugitives. But we had survived, and we had made sure the story would get out. A few papers, dropped in the chaos, would be found. A pilot would talk. A ground crew member would see. The truth was out there, in a dozen different pieces, and it was a flood Kaido could never stop. "You were right," Mara said finally, her voice soft in the darkness. "It was a good show." The best, I said, my eyes on the endless road ahead. Now what? She looked at me, a real, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. The femme fatale, the girl who sold midnight, was gone. In her place was a woman who had faced down monsters and helped set a fire. Now, she said, we find a new name, a new town, and we start over. I looked at her, at the grime on her face and the fire in her eyes. I had walked into a nightclub looking for a quiet drink and had found a war. I had lost a suit, gained a few scars, and made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the country. And I wouldn't have traded it for anything. Sounds like a plan, I said, and drove on into the night.